days, so that will be fun. But so it's good to see you. A lot of participants online also. So big welcome from my side to this workshop organized by CEN in CEN offices on mainly the development of complementary product category rules in the light of CPR and also in the light of standardization requests. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, we have a mixed audience probably. The focus of the audience is, of course, product TCs involved in developing complementary product category rules, but we are aware that some of you might not be fully involved yet. And so, as an introduction, it's mainly dealing in the light of the new construction products regulation of end of last year, 2024. And as hopefully most of you know, what we call EPD for the time being for today, the information on the environmental impacts will become mandatory to declare in the Declaration of Performance and Conformity over the next 15 years. So that's a big shift in the world of environmental information. And so all product TCs, all product groups listed in the CPR will be involved. So big exercise, and we thought as a CEN TC 350 that it would be good to explain to you what the current status is, inform you on that current status, but also to collect information, questions from you, the concerns, because there's a lot of questions we know. We will do our best to answer what we know today. The questions which we collect also in the chat from the, I think there's over 300 people online. So we will collect them. We will not answer them today live. That's a bit too challenging, but we will collect them and then answer them as good as possible over the coming month. And then also there's some information on next steps. And we have foreseen after every speaker, which Karin will present the agenda in a minute. After every speaker, we have foreseen time for questions and answers, mainly from those who made the effort to come and join us here. So a big welcome. Let's hope to have an interesting, fruitful day with a lot of discussions. And that's maybe the start of a new era of environmental information, and also that product TCs know how to deal with it. And then I hand over to Karin, who is the manager of TC 350, and who I'm happy to collaborate with.
So thank you, Then I'm Karin Dari. I'm in charge of TC 350. I work for AFNOR. I'm also in charge of the mirror committee of this committee in ISO. So we try to have a consistency between Europe and international standards. That's important for the users. You have the agenda on the screen, and we have tried to have a complete workshop with regulatory aspect and standardization aspects, and also some experience to be shared. So that's important. We try to use that. Yes. So the speakers, Dieter was the first one, you know him. Then we have Julia Gorka, who is the convener of the working group 3 in charge of 15804. So a very important working group in our committee. Nuno from CEN, who is close to me. Oscar Nieto from the Commission, who agreed to participate. Very thank you. And Alessio Rimoldi and Eric Winderpennick. I'm sorry if I don't say it very good. So they will share their experience with you. Then first, I would like to introduce you our committee, because it's important to understand why this committee is presenting you this aspect of the c-PCR. So we are an horizontal committee on sustainability. We draft standards on all the aspects of sustainability for construction works, meaning existing and new buildings or civil engineering works, but also products. We deal with environmental, social, and economic performance. And all of this in the context of the United Nations objective, but also the climate change adaptation, the resilience, the circular economy, and also the digitalization. Then dealing with environmental performance, we have drafted the 15804, so the so-called, the very important standard you are here for. And then we had a 2BT decision in 2013 and 2022 that gives our committee the rule to check all the c-PCR that other committees that policies are drafting, and then to check their consistency and their conformity to 15804. That is why we are here today, and Julia will explain you the rule we have with this decision of the BT. Just I have forgotten to tell you that our committee has been created in 2005, so it's not new. And 5 years ago, as I told you, we are in the context of the circular economy, and 5 years ago we have created a subcommittee on circular economy, which has begun to work, and as I will show you, has now a lot to do. No, it's in this. I don't know if you see it correctly, but I will try to explain how is organized our committee. Just a second. So we have 9 working groups in the TC350. So on buildings, on product level, on economic performance, social performance, but also on civil engineering work. And now on taxonomy, because we cannot deal with sustainability without talking of taxonomy nowadays. And one refurbishment, as I told you, we deal with new building, but also with existing building. And I explain you, we have a new subcommittee on circular economy, and they have now 6 working groups, which is important, and a lot of projects also. Then on circular information, on circular assessment, on digital product passport also, and design, etc. and audit. So a huge committee with a lot of standards and horizontal standards. And the one which interests you is working group 3 of the TC with 15804 on EPD, but also a standard we have drafted with ISO. It's on how to deal with EPD in the BIM, so for digitalization. And we have data quality, communication, B2B and B2C. So that's the presentation of the TC, and now I will let the floor to the next one. Who is Oscar?
Do we need to run this presentation? Yeah.
It's the first number 1, right? It's the 1.
Hello, good morning.
Here he is.
Thank you for the invitation to participate. I know there is a lot of expectations. We have been receiving questions and comments about the c-PCR and all the work we have been doing. So I hope I can provide a bit of light in this complex topic. Sorry, because I could not send the slides in a way that could be integrated in the slide deck, so they are now changing. But first of all, my first message for you is that I know that the work you are having in front of you is very difficult, but I wanted you also think of how this will result in a future system that will be fully harmonized and will really transform the traditional business of EPDs into really a system that is integrated in the regulation and also serves for the purposes of the regulatory requirements established at European level and also at national level. So I think it's a lot of work. I know it's just transferring very complex technical content into a regulatory framework, but the added value will really be the single market and also reduce the efforts of manufacturers who will be able to work once on the environmental assessment and use this information in any context. So that's the goal we have. So good news, probably you already know that the regulation was finally published in the journal, so you can now check the text. We have a reference. It was a long delay until it was finally published, not under our control, but this is the situation. And you will see that the text is not very straightforward as regards the environmental provisions. There are some elements that are distributed in the text. And also we have Annex 2, we have also Annex 3 and Annex 4 with some environmental, I would say, characteristics. But we really think that the regulation is just the legal framework, is the element that links the information and the market to the regulatory framework. But the added value will be the information provided in the harmonized standards for every product, in the European assessment documents, and in particular for the technical elements in the c-PCR, which will be the link between the technical assessment from the environmental point of view and the product compliance with the regulation, which will be the harmonized standards. In other words, there is no need to really go so far in the details of the regulation, while the main principles are clear and will be perfectly explained in the standards. So it should be possible to work and implement the environmental part without really having to check the regulatory framework. This is more for the people that are more in the middle of the process, such as us or some people in sense. The time frame is important. Also, probably you already know that the new obligations of the CPR will not apply to your products until there is a harmonized standard cited under the new regulation. So it's not a regulation that enters into force in one date and applies to all products. This is not the case. So there is a specific time frame for each product family. So for example, if we have a standard for the new regulation that will be cited, made mandatory in the official journal in 2028, 1 year later, there will be the obligations of the CPR will apply to it, not before. And if you are working with the standards under the old CPR, you continue with the old CPR, and the environmental part will only apply if your standards already included that, which is stoves, precast concrete, and structural metallic products. Apart from that, the framework, really the new framework, only applies to the products under the new regulation. And you see already that there is specific obligations for the declaration of some indicators, but these obligations will only apply to the new CPR, not to the standards under the old CPR. Main message, the core of the system is exactly the same. So you have a product, the product is in the scope of a harmonized standard, and there is a declaration of performance, which is based on performance, really essential characteristics, and these performance also include now environmental characteristics. The main elements are distributed in or grouped in basic requirements for construction works. This is exactly the same than in the old CPR, but we have now a bit clearer basic requirement of construction works. I would like to mention a couple of elements that are very relevant. The emissions into the outdoor environment and also the emissions to soil and groundwater are separated. In the EPDs, they are now provided together. In the CPR, they are separated. And we have also the CO2 emissions and the sustainable use of natural resources a bit better organized. So not a big change, but also I think it's important to mention the issue with the release and emission of dangerous substances. The part that is more connected to the work in CNTC 350, not only, but is more connected, is the environmental indicators. So these are the environmental indicators, the LCA indicators in 15824, and you have there the time in which these indicators will be declared mandatory, which means that if you have a standard under the new CPR cited in the official journal, from the moment the standard is made mandatory, you have to declare global warming potential, climate change, the four elements. By 9 January 2030, the core indicators, and by 9 January 2032, the full list of LCAs. Standards will always contain the full list. So you will always have all of them. And if you started, imagine you have the standard in 2029. In 2029, you can decide to declare all, or you can just declare climate change effects, but you will need to revise your DOP 9 of January 2030 to include the others if you didn't declare them before. So this is how the obligation will apply. So I have discussed this with some manufacturers. Some they say, well, I do the assessment, I will put the full list from the beginning, there is no point. Others may prefer to really focus on only the mandatory obligation. Something that is very important, if a member state requires 1, 2, or all the indicators, the manufacturer placing a product in the market will need to declare it. This obligation that you have in the screen is at European level, but the member states can establish stricter obligations. This is applicable to all characteristics in the CPR. So in the CPR, we may establish some characteristics that are mandatory, but some are not. But if a member state needs this information for some applications, the manufacturer will need to deliver this information. Life cycle assessment indicators follow the same approach. So if one country requests ADP, you will need to declare ADP to place the product in this market. As Dieter already said before, what we are doing is now transferring the information from the EPD, really the information about the environmental assessment, into the DOPC. Can we have EPDs in the market? Yes, but the regulation is very clear. The information in the EPD needs to be exactly the same than the information in the DOPC. So you have to be careful. So you cannot have a declaration and an EPD that doesn't match with the declaration in the DOPC for the same product, because this is not compliant with the regulation. Okay. Another important message, you have seen before that we only have obligations in Annex 2 for the life cycle assessment indicators, but in all standardization requests and in all the standards, you will have the full list of indicators. Also, the energy, the waste, all the full list. But these additional indicators will only be mandatory if a member state requests it. By default, they are voluntary. So, for example, if you have a country in which secondary materials is requested for any reason, you will have to declare it to place the product in this one. Okay, this is a bit, it was not in the slides, but I wanted to clarify. The regulation, really the core of the environmental part of the regulation is EPD, so EPD information. But the regulation also includes the possibility to establish, you see, some requirements. One of them is environmental requirements. This is a complementary element for the environmental characteristics that cannot be assessed and declared. So if we want to establish a specific requirement for a product, such as it cannot be glued, or it must follow certain process, because we identify that this process or this procedure really undermines the sustainability of the product. On the contrary to the approach that we have for the first part, all the EPD approach will work, LC approach will work horizontally. This part is product specific. So we discuss product by product if we need these specific requirements. At the moment in the process we have been going through in the last years, we didn't find any requirement, but we may find them later when we will go through all the products. And you have a very long list of elements that could be subject to these requirements. You have the column in the end. Environment is very long. And just to clarify, in this table, you have, for example, resource efficiency, and you have minimizing greenhouse gas emission. These are requirements that will apply if we identify that the LCA is not enough. So if we have a life cycle assessment, in the life cycle assessment, we have a evaluation and you have the values that we need to establish an additional condition, an additional requirement, we will cover this. That's why you see that sometimes you have the same element in both. So you have, for example, the recycled content and you will have the secondary material. It doesn't mean that we are going to implement it twice. So the default approach will be the part that is for the LCA. But if we identify also the need to establish an additional requirement, we will do it in this context. And the process you saw is a bit different, so it's not included in the standardization request. But I just wanted to clarify this because there are a lot of questions about it, but it's not the main focus of this group. Your main focus is the other part. And there is a third element, which is the guidelines, which is part of the information that the manufacturers will be obliged to deliver. This is also not so close to the work of 50/50, but it's important because what we want in the regulation is to ensure that for some practices and some processes that are out of the control of the manufacturer, when the manufacturer cannot really be responsible for it, at least deliver information about how it should be done. It's guidelines, it's not binding, and it just clarifies, for example, how the end of life of the product should take place. So you see that there are a lot of elements. Some of them are related to the maintenance, the demolition. I want to call your attention to the last box. This is in Annex 4. Recommendations for a product's end of life, reuse, manufacturing, recycle, and safe delivery. So it's, as I said, a different element just to complement what is already delivered in the other two branches of the diagrams. Again, this will be in the standards. That is just to facilitate also for the consumer the possibility of to understand better how to work with the product and make sure that through the by using the product in the wrong way, they do not undermine the environmental performance of the product. As I said, again, this is also important that it's not closely related to the work of c-PCR. So you see the three branches. You should focus in the top branch. The others are also relevant, but will be discussed for every product family separately, and we may find specific information. So the idea is that with the top branch, we really deal with the real environmental information. The bottom branch is just to complement it with the specific requirements to ensure that we do not have environmentally unfriendly products in the market. And the middle branch is to ensure that when the products are used, the information about them is clear and is available. A big concern, if you have national obligations for the installation, for the end of life, or for whatever in the building, they are prevail over these guidelines about installation. So this regulation is about placing on the market. It's not about installation. So just to be clear, you write there information, but it's really what really makes is important is what is mandatory in the country where the product is installed. So this is a bit the legal framework. I know it's very easy to digest, but I see that some of you have seen these diagrams a lot of times, so probably you are even bored of them. but I think it's always good to explain and also provide a bit of focus. And then I'm going to speak about the CPR process, which is also a process that is very related to the activities of the product groups and CNTC 350. And we have the specific subgroup on environmental sustainability. I think probably most of you are also experts there, or at least have access, because you have access in the moment you are an expert for the CPR expert group. Even for you are an expert, I don't know, in cement, you have access to the information there. We have milestones, I will explain them, and we have some documents that will help you to work in this field. What are the main goals? So develop the technical frameworks, so clarify how a voluntary standard leading to environmental product declarations in the market can be used in the context of a regulation for which some rules are a bit different. So this is the role of this subgroup, clarify how it works. We also have to ensure consistency across materials in the same way that the work that CNTC 350 is doing when they assess c-PCR, to ensure that we are not having double counting or gaps in the environmental assessment. And also we want to make sure that the information that you are delivering in the context of the CPR in your DOPCs really is used for the regulatory frameworks in which this information is needed. Mainly EPBD, but also taxonomy and potentially any requirement that will need this information. So that's a bit the role of this group. I know it's a bit challenging and quite ambitious, but we really think the work of this group should be really the gear in the middle of the system that make the two walls, the EPD wall and the CPR wall, to really. We are quite advanced in our work, at least from my point of view. Some people may say we are not so advanced, but we have, you see in green, a lot of documents already delivered. We have already the list of indicators, which was quite easy because we just used the 15824. We have also the methodology. We have also the third-party verification, third-party validation, and also the mandatory declaration. A lot of these points were discussed also during the negotiations. We have adopted the delegated R under the old CPR. So the system, regulatory system, is more or less established. And also we have a specific group of notified bodies dealing with this third-party validation. Pending issues you see in orange, we have the carbon removals, we have the background data sets. So the work of this group continues, and we are trying to solve the problems that we identified over the last years. So very fast, milestone A, we have the LCA indicators, which were already in the regulation, no discussion about them. Other EPD indicators all included, and other indicators outside the CPR, outside 15824. For the moment, they are not included. We will see in future. We didn't find really enough reliability to really go for additional indicators. This discussion may take place in the coming years, but for the moment, everybody should focus on the indicators in 15824. Milestone B is about the methodology, and I want to clarify something. In the regulation, we mentioned a software delivered by the Commission to do the assessment. This is not an LCA software. Okay. This is just the information that you need to do the calculations, okay, like the characterization factors. And we are now working on the possibility to also have background data. Okay, this is what we are doing. In future, I don't know what will happen. We may have a software, but for the moment and in the short, medium term, there is no software of the Commission. In the negotiations, it was written in that way to be as open as possible. Potentially in future, if the system is mature enough, it may happen. But usually, in case you use a software, which is not mandatory, the software will be a life cycle assessment software used by the manufacturer. You can use your own software, you can subcontract it. and is under your responsibility. So it's the manufacturer who is responsible. You can subcontract it, of course. There is no limitation to that, but it's under your responsibility. And it's also subject to the ABS 3+. So in the ABS, you have specific points where you have to validate the information, the modeling, the inputs. So this is a task for the notified bodies. Okay, I hope it is clear because I think in the regulation it is not clear. And the reason why we include it also is because you have in the blue part, in the what we call commission software, allow me to say, we have a coexistence period of 1 year just to ensure that if we change characterization factors, you have 1 year to adapt. This is why it's there and why we wanted to make sure that there was a reference in the legal text. But as I said, the Commission is not going to deliver any life cycle assessment software for any. We will also write this in our website to make sure that nobody really, if you're a manufacturer, please don't go to your factory and say, no, we have to wait until the Commission delivers software and then we will do it. No, this is not the way it's going to work. There are clauses in 15.824 that does not apply. This is a summary. Please check the document in milestone B for the details. Types of EPD do not apply because in the regulation we have full life cycle. We have also the release of dangerous substances, the ownership and responsibility. The project report will not be there. It will be the technical documentation. So be careful. Not everything that is in the EPD will apply in the CPR. It doesn't mean that it's useless. No, it's very useful if you are producing EPDs, if you are outside the harmonized zone, either because you are not yet in the new CPR or because you are not going to be in the CPR. There are products which are outside the harmonized standards, okay? But it should be clear that these parts do not apply in relation to the declaration in the declaration of performance and conformance. And very important also, there will be a huge amount of information. You already know that EPDs are very big. And even with some of them only covering some modules, there are already a lot. We are also having more information about the scenario. So all the information will be digitalized. And that's why we are digitalizing the information as part of the DOPC. So you will have all the information in the DOPC. The technical information and all the all the results of the life cycle assessment for every module, every indicator, everything. So it's a huge amount of information. That's why we need to digitize it. So this is also an important message. This goes to the next point that is also very relevant for you, especially if you are writing c-PCR. We cannot have, this is the common practice in EPDs, national scenarios, local scenarios. This is not possible. So we need to develop harmonized scenarios in the c-PCR. What is a harmonized scenario is a scenario that works at European level. Okay, so this is an example of a scenario for transport. It's transport by kilometer. We don't know what will be the distance. You deliver information to calculate it when you will know where the product is going to be installed. And that's it. And we will have this parametric for European scenarios for all the different modules apart from A1, A3. There is another example, which is the recycling, for example. And in case they depend on the energy use, you declare it in function of the energy. So because you don't know what will be the energy use in the country. So the idea is not to deliver the final results, just to deliver the information necessary to calculate the final results. Why so complex? Because we need to make sure that this approach works at European level. And you don't have to declare different scenarios for every country. This doesn't fit with the regulation. If there is a scenario that is European, for example, the installation of a product is always in the same way, you just drill a hole, put an element, and you can identify the scenario, and it doesn't matter where you do it. It's really independent because values are very low. You can have a European scenario that will not have any parameter, but this is just in case, For example, for maintenance, when you use certain chemicals, this could be possible. But in general, we go for the parametric scenarios. And also in the document, you will find a point that is very relevant, in particular for SMEs. The simplified procedures that are applicable to the CPR in general also apply to the environmental information. You have here a summary. The first one is very important, declaration without testing. So we can adopt a delegated act at European level and have a kind of value by default that does not require any assessment or calculation. The manufacturer will be allowed to just declare this performance without any additional condition. And well, of course, if we decided for certain products, it will apply only to these products. It will be very conservative. It will cover really a situation in which it's always like this. If you are familiar with the performances, this is very common for high performance. There are products that are classified as A because the high performance is always good. This is the same. So if you have a product for which the certain environmental emissions are always below one value, we adopt a delegated act. We establish under these conditions, the manufacturer can declare this information without really having to go through the system 3 plan. Okay, this is very important. We need the support of the industry and stakeholders to do it because we don't have the technical content to do it, but you may have it, and this is a process that we are now discussing. The second is also what we call cascading. This is important also for SMEs, in particular when there is a big manufacturer delivering products that are used by another manufacturer and the final manufacturer just assemble them. So the provider can be subject to the ABS 3 plan, do the life cycle assessment, and the final manufacturer will just have to aggregate the information and deliver the information in a simplified way. And the last one is also important. If more than one company is producing the same product, they can share the environmental assessment, they can do the assessment together, and they can declare it. Again, they will need to have an assessment that is valid for both. But there are a lot of processes in which really all manufacturers work exactly in the same way. They use the same type of energy, the same kind of process. So they can just sign an agreement, do a life cycle assessment, and then the part of the notified body for the validation will be much simpler. So I think this is also important because this is going to be quite complex for a lot of companies because System 3 Plus will apply to products which are now System 4, in which there is no notified body. System 3 Plus is clear, is in the old CPR, is in the new CPR. As I said, we had some discussions with the group of notified bodies to make sure how it works. Probably is not what you expected. This is the result of the negotiations. I hope it will be reliable enough and will not be too burdensome, but this is what we have. I would like also to list more or less what is the work plan. You see, these are the priorities. We are already starting masonry and aggregate. So those of you who represent these two groups, we are finding a date late March for the first meeting. We have started already the first 8 standardization requests for 1, 2, and 5. 1, 2 are finished. 5 is already going to be finished very soon, and 4 also very soon. And we will try to have a standardization request for the probably try to have for the first 5 products, 6 products this year, with the idea of having a standardization requests every year. And also I call your attention to the fast track in orange. This is when the PC already was working. You can also have a standardization request faster through this process, and you will enter into the system. In all cases, the same rules apply. You will need the c-PCR. We will include the c-PCR in the standardization request with the harmless scenarios and all the elements.
Recording in progress.
We are also discussing with the CPR acquis expert group We are also discussing in the CPR
can
expert
look
group
at
if we need to change the priorities from 11 to the end, but don't expect big changes. So we will only change if we see that there is a problem. It was a bit strange that we had precast concrete before cement aggregate. So this is a kind of situation that we may need to find and also group some products, but in general, I hope it will be okay. And my conclusions, I have another presentation in the afternoon about the different policies, but I think this is very important. So the system, we are creating a new system, so nothing is perfect. It's a lot of work. There is a lot of uncertainty, I know, but I want to give you a lot of stability as regards the use of 15.4, the use of your c-PCR, all the processes being coordinated with the support of SEN. They are doing an excellent job both at PC and also at Simplicity 50 level. If you have a specific questions, specific remarks, I know some of you were already sending questions. This is very useful. Thank you for that. We will try to solve as much as we can. And we have some pending issues. The carbon removals, this is something that is not fully implemented. We have a carbon removal certification scheme that is now in a European level. This is something that we are working to see how we can fit this into the system. Again, the work of Simplicity 50, drafting some documents about it is also very useful. We are now starting the process to identify the material flows and the processes to deliver background data sets to make sure that there is no discrepancies in the environmental assessment due to the use of different background data. This is an ongoing work, and we hope this year we can already start into the process to find this data that will be available to the network. And we also need to work specifically with the industry and the experts on the declaration without testing to make sure that we do not overload manufacturers, especially those who produce a product with a very low impact in the building. So if you have a product for which really the environmental impact is very low compared to the other products, right, it doesn't make sense to establish a very hard system with a lot of steps, and we could have this declaration without testing to simplify their work. In any case, they can always assess and declare. So this is an optional approach. So if we establish it, it's optional. And I think that was all, as I said, for the morning. I don't know if it was clear enough, but also I will be here for questions and.
Okay, thank you very much, Oscar. To me, it was very clear. A lot of things were a little bit more understandable, not everything. Every sentence raises other questions. But so I would like to give preference for questions to the people in the room. And if there's nobody who has a question, could be. If there's no one with a question, we can go through the chat. And if not, I will try to find 10-15 minutes for question and answer. And I see very enthusiastic people who want to ask a question. But Jochen was first, and then Ari, who was waving hearts, and then over there, and then I will see again.
With respect to the background data, I understand that the use of this background data will be mandatory. So in our LCA, we have to use the data from the commission.
No. The idea is that if you have more reliable data, so if you receive the data from your supplier and it's also third-party validated with System 3+, and it follows the same, you can use these other data. But in case you cannot have this data because it's not accessible or you have no idea about transport or some elements, you use the data that is in the background data set. And
for example, electricity, will I have to use them? For the other question, will you use data from existing databases or will you create your own data?
What we are going to do is validate data that already exists. And this data can be used and the notified bodies will consider that this data is valid. If you use other data, the notified bodies will need to check if it is valid or not. And always, the last decision is in the hands of the notified bodies who will need to check. And in the end, macro-surveillance authorities may also challenge this decision. But in principle, we expect that the notified bodies will really filter what is valid and what not, and will tell the manufacturer if they can use data or not.
Thank you. Ari? Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, okay. Yes, my point is that, okay, of course, from point of view of the, so I am from Finland, also convener of the 350 working one. Yes, my point is that when it comes to the, where we are using this information, is the filling level assessment. So this is where we are using this information, also the CPR. So, but that point of view, I think it's important that we have a same level of understanding that using it. And that means that, so basically, no product comparison is not allowed. But of course, at the national level, you can do it what you want. Anyway, point is that everything what we are doing is to have a building parts and building elements to the building level. So this is the point. And everything what you have to assess is at the building level. And that's why we are now, maybe you all know that we are having new version of the EN 15978 now in a pipeline to be promoted in a formal mode. And that is where we have this assessment, how it should be done. And I think this is important to remember that it's not product comparison, it's about building level assessment. Thank you.
Yes, well, I think this was a question, but I just to clarify. So, of course, it's very important to use this information in the GeoPC for environment on the EPBD and the life cycle assessment of buildings. But this is not the only place where this information will be used. We have some like this afternoon. So we have taxonomy, we have also national application. We also want that the environmental information is used for civil engineering works. So I think, of course, the most relevant will be the EPBD. The core of the system is the EPBD, but EPBD is also CO2 emissions, and member states may have other indicators. So in practice, the CPR is very focused on environmental information according to the EPBD, but it's broader. It really covers regulatory needs of the member states in general, not only in connection to the European legislation for buildings.
Okay, couple of questions more. I'm gonna shift to Pete. If you can keep it the question short and present yourself.
Yeah.
Took you by accident, I see that now.
Does it work?
Sure.
Yeah.
So as for this slide, and a bit it's Belgium, also task group leader for the DC88 on the c-PCR thermal installation. On the slide on which you mentioned these Article 7 and 8 of the CPR, and for which then you mentioned also the part of voluntary harmonized scenarios, or sorry, standard. So functional requirements, safety requirements, environmental requirements. Yeah. So this is the core, for which that would be the basis for voluntary standards. How to understand this, especially that you mentioned this will be also part of the delegated act. Does this mean that this voluntary harmonized standard, is this part of the product standard, or is it an other kind of standard? Thank you.
Okay. It's a separate branch. So you have your product standard for performance, which is similar to the product standards you have now. You have mandatory declaration of performance, and you have the life cycle assessment indicators there. Okay, this is one element. If we want to establish product requirements, it's a separate element. The first thing we do is adopt a delegated act. European Commission adopts a delegated act and establishes a requirement. And the requirement gives you this example: the product shall not be glued. Okay, this is a requirement, environmental requirement. We put it in the delegated act for this product family. The product shall not be glued. If this is so easy as that, probably you don't need anything else. You have a delegated act, and all products placed in the European market cannot be glued. If one is glued, market surveillance authorities will remove. But it may happen that the requirement is that the product shall be easy to dismantle. Okay, this is not so easy to assess. And then, if this is the case, the delegated act will establish the requirement, the product shall be easy to dismantle. And we will have a separate standardization request, requesting the product DC to draft a voluntary standard describing a procedure that if you follow, you are considered fulfilling this criteria. So, for example, you will have this standardization request for the assessment of dismantleability of the product. And then you go to the CNTC and they deliver a process in which you just take the product, you use simple tools, and you describe this process. In the moment we cite this standard, if a manufacturer wants to fulfill this requirement for easy dismantleability, he just needs to go through the process in the standard and he's supposed to be compliant with the requirement. But it's totally separated. So it's not included in the same performance harmonized standard, it's a separate harmonized standard, and is only triggered after there is a delegated act. So in the new standards, you will see that we have always performance assessment and declaration. So we are asking all the standards. You will see in the new CPR that we have performance assessment and declaration, which is the part that is for the core of the system, the top branch. And then we may have the same product requirements, and this will be the other element. But the first is always applied, and the second only if we really see the. Okay, but as I said, we have not a lot of situations like this.
Okay, maybe first Olympia, so, and then.
I'm going to ask the second most popular question after the LCA software. It's about worst case versus average.
Yeah.
What does it really mean? How are we going to define it? And at which level?
This was also very, very relevant. So it's very clear in the regulation that the manufacturer assumes the responsibility of the performance of your product. So whatever you declare in your performance needs to be fulfilled by the product. So if somebody can identify that the value that you declare is too optimistic and they can prove that is not correct, you are subject to the liability of the dealer. An example, I have two factories. One is working with coal and one is working with PV panels. I declare a value that is very low because it's the value from the PV panel or an average. And somebody identified that the product was delivered from the factory using coal. I put N in code, and then the code will decide if the manufacturers were liable and if it was correct or not. So it's not, it's an interpretation that I have that you should be careful. In the end, the regulation is there, you work with it. I would be careful with having an average, especially if somebody can identify that the performance is not what you declare. So that's why this is sometimes called worst case scenario. Probably this is not the right term because it's not really a worst case scenario. It's just to make sure that the manufacturer is always delivering information that cannot be challenged. And you can always declare a higher value just to be safe or to avoid that, I don't know, variation in your production or potential problems with your suppliers will have. This is always an option. You can always have a value that is more conservative. But in the end, whatever you will do, you will be liable. And if somebody identifies that your declaration doesn't fit, you again will have to face the consequences of that. So that's the reason why we were discussing this in the past. I hope it's clear why and how.
Okay, thank you. One last small question, because then we need to move on, otherwise we are here for a
Yeah,
week.
Thomas Witters from the TC72 Fixed Firefighting Equipment. I have a question. There's the horizontal acquis group on sustainability. And is it possible that the acquis subgroups will finish before this environmental horizontal group finish the work? Because it's the input for the other groups.
The core of the work is finished. So what, for example, and everything that is not delivered up to now will not be implemented. So for example, the carbon removals is not finished. We are now adopting the standardization request for cement. It doesn't contain carbon removals because it's not ready. So we are implementing whatever is ready up to this point, but the core system is already there. But as I said, for example, there are other elements such as the declaration without testing. It's a delegated data that goes in parallel, so we don't need to wait until it's finished. We can adopt it in parallel to the standardization request. So the work in this group sometimes is really precondition to launch the work. This is more or less finished. It can be done in parallel. We really can do it, and there is no real issue. Thanks.
Okay. Unfortunately, we have to close the questions here, but you can send them in the chats, and then we will do our best to address them in a realistic time frame. Okay, let's move on to the next speaker, which is Nuno, sitting next to me, who is big support for us, and who will explain you the process more in detail.
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. I will not stand because the participants online cannot see the speaker. So I will turn the camera here. So the 400 people at home are also can see the speaker. So, okay. Okay, so the goal of this presentation is really to explain the process on how harmonized standards are developed in the context of the c-PCR, and also to make the link with the c-PCR. This is the, let's say, the structure of this presentation. So first, I'll go through the workflow of how harmonized standards are developed. Then I will shortly explain the CPR acquis process. Then we'll go through the process of how standardization requests are developed, also harmonized standards. And then at the end, I'll just give some important highlights on how on the aspects that the CNTCs need to have in mind when they are drafting the c-PCR. Some acronyms. So you will see some of these acronyms in the slides of my presentation. I just want to mention two acronyms that are quite important that some people never heard of. The SHRAG. So the SHRAG stands for Standardization Request Ad Hoc Group, and the SHREC. So it's not the character of the cartoon, but it stands for Standardization Request. So here you can see the flow of how harmonized standards are developed in the context of the new CPR. So as a first step, you have the CPR acquis process. When this work is finalized, then we enter into the step 2, which means that then the standardization request will be developed and then hopefully accepted, of course, by CEN. Step 3, then CEN technical committees can start drafting the harmonized standards. And the step 4, it means that the harmonized standard is published and then it is offered to the European Commission for their assessment. Step 1 is the CPR acquis, as I just said. So the goal is really to ensure compliance of the harmonized standards and the legal acts. So we're talking about the mandates, the delegated acts with the current and with the revised CPR. Because it's a lot of work, the Commission had to put in place a priority list. So this priority list was developed based on a survey that was sent to member states with criteria. And the outcome of that survey is the priority list that you can see here of 34 product families. And of course, the Commission, together with the experts and also CNTC experts, are part of these subgroups of the CPR acquis. The Commission started, of course, with the ones that are on top. In other words, the CPR acquis, and that's, I think, most important for you, the main task is really to collect, so to gather all the necessary information that will help the European Commission to draft standardization requests. So from the CEN point of view, and that's that's our position in a way. We really need the CPR acquis. We need that all those old mandates that contain outdated information are revised so we can have new standardization requests and so we can develop harmonized standards that are state of the art. So I will not go through this list because Oscar already mentioned it, but we can discuss, of course, later on after this event. Step 2 is the process to develop a standardization request. So first, the Commission will need to conclude all the work in the CPR acquis, in the specific subgroup for a particular product family. Then the Commission will then have all the elements to draft the first draft standardization request. Then the Commission will submit the standardization request to SEN, and then we will establish the SRAG, so the standardization request ad hoc group. On this slide, you have some explanation of what is the SRAG, but in short, the SRAG has two main tasks. The first task is really to go through the first draft standardization request or the different draft standardization request, and then prepare comments and agree on the comments to be submitted to the European Commission. That's the task number 1. The task number 2 is when we receive the final draft standardization request, the SRAG has the role to discuss the content of this final draft and then provide a recommendation to the SEN technical board on whether to accept or reject the standardization request. In terms of membership of the SRAG, you have the convener, normally is one of the chairs of an impacted TC by that standardization request. CCMC holds the secretariat of the SRAG. You have interested SEN-BT permanent delegates. So this is the new name for SEN-BT members, by the way. Experts nominated by the SEN-BT permanent delegates at national level, partner organizations, but really important representatives from the impacted technical committee. So this means you. Okay, back to the process of how to develop a standardization request. So there are many, many steps. I will focus on the most important ones. So as I said, as soon as we receive the first draft standardization request, the SRAG will collect comments, will hold meetings. From my experience of the 2 ongoing ones, it's really many meetings if there are many comments. So all the comments provided by the members of the SRAG need to be discussed and agreed. Eventually, we will send all those comments to the European Commission. And hopefully, of course, the Commission will take on board our comments, revise the standardization request, improve it, of course, from our point of view, and then prepare the stable version. And then the same process applies. We will organize another meeting or meetings, discuss the stable version, the second version, and then submit additional comments to the European Commission. Meanwhile, of course, there are many steps, but again, a very important one is that when the Commission considers that they have a final version of the standardization request, they will submit for vote in the Committee on Standards. So the member states will have normally 1 month to vote by correspondence. The Commission call it the written procedure. And after that, after the outcome of the voting cause is disclosed, if it's positive, then the SEN-BT will be invited to accept or reject the standardization, hopefully accept, of course, the standardization request. So overall, these are the main steps. There are many other small steps, but these are the ones that are the most important. So you may have heard many times mandates and standardization requests, and sometimes they are misused. So I thought it would be interesting to have a slide to compare the differences between mandates and standardization requests. So the mandate is all the requests that were sent by the Commission to SEN before the 1st of January 2013. Why this date? Because this is the date where EU Regulation 1025 on EU standardization became applicable. So of course, we cannot no longer use mandates. Yeah, you know the position of the Commission, they are outdated and we need to move to standardization requests. On this slide, what you can see is a table that compare mandates and standardization requests. I will only focus on 3 aspects. The first one is the validity. Mandates are very open, very flexible. You don't have, let's say, an expiry date in the mandate. However, the standardization requests will have an expiration date, after which, in theory, once the standardization request is expired, if you need to revise the harmonized standards, we will need another standardization request. The second point is deliverables. So the mandates are very open, almost like a blank sheet. So the technical committees can propose to develop any harmonized standard as they want, well, as long as it is in the scope of that original mandate. But of course, the Commission would need to also check that. But looking at the standardization request, you have a prescriptive list of all the standards, harmonized standards that need to be developed. So if you want to develop an harmonized standard or a standard to be harmonized that is not included in the list of the standardization request, basically you don't have the legal basis to do it, and we will need to discuss with the European Commission to check if it would be possible, for instance, to amend the standardization request. The third point is about the deadlines for the deliverables. So the mandates, because they don't have the list of standards to be developed, there are no deadlines as well. Looking at the standardization request, each of the harmonized standard being requested, there will be a specific deadline as well for the delivery of that project or that standard. We have mentioned already some important BT decisions, and I think it's not going to be probably the last time we're going to listen to this today. If you receive a draft standardization request, there is a BT decision that we need to have in mind. It was taken in 2022 that indicates that if you have a draft standardization request and if environmental characteristics or information or EN 1504 is mentioned in the standardization request, then first, CEN/TC 350 needs to be informed, and then there are as well some, let's say, tasks for CEN/TCs, product TCs, so they can inform the CEN/TC 350 Secretariat about the c-PCRs that need to be developed. They need to liaise with CEN/TC 350, use the templates, and also ensure that the c-PCRs to be developed are in line with the EN 15804. On this slide, you have the Annex 1 of the standardization request. I took an example from the precast concrete standardization request. It's quite typical the way it looks. Article 1 of the standardization request is just, well, it's the Commission asking CEN to develop the harmonized standards that are listed in the Annex 1. Annex 1 typically includes two tables. Table 1 is for the new harmonized standards to be developed, where Table 2 is for those standards that harmonized standards that need to be revised. In red here in the box, these are the, let's say, performance-based harmonized standards, the classic harmonized standards for construction products that the Commission is requesting. So in this case, you can see 3. And in green, you can see that the European Commission is also requesting the development of c-PCRs. Okay, for one completely brand new standard, and the other one is a revision of an existing c-PCR. Each of these standards will have a deadline. This is exactly what I explained earlier. So the deadlines are here, okay? And this is something that we need to have in mind. The Commission may also ask us to develop c-PCRs within the standardization request. The Annex 2 of the standardization request is the longest part of this document. So it includes very general requirements on harmonized standards, on normative references, and so on. And then you have very specific requirements for each of the harmonized standards to be developed. One of the horizontal requirements that we have seen from our experience is that the standardization work must be in line with the horizontal standards from CEN/TC 350, in particular the EN 1504. There is also a statement there that the standards need to be aligned, at least for the case of precast concrete products, with the c-PCRs. Moving to the specificities of each harmonized standard. So the Annex 2 indicates what each harmonized standard needs to have. So, of course, the products covered, the intended uses that are applicable, and all the list of relevant essential characteristics. There is one essential characteristic that will be common for all harmonized standards, which is environmental sustainability. So, in general, each essential characteristic will need to have an assessment method. The assessment method for environmental sustainability will be the c-PCR. So this is really the link between harmonized standards and the c-PCRs. Typically, Annex 3 is about the environmental sustainability. So here, this is an example that also Alessio will further explain, but this is a typical Annex 3, so the list of essential characteristics for environmental sustainability. We are very happy to see that these characteristics are in line with the EN 1504. Also, Alessio will explain a bit more this. We took this example from the draft standardization request for precast concrete products. And as you can see, there are some requirements for the scenarios to be included in your c-PCR. So if your c-PCR is included in a standardization request, you need to make sure that the requirements in the standardization request are included in your c-PCR. So the question is a c-PCR an harmonized standard? Okay, and the answer from my point of view is it depends. If it's included in a standardization request, then the answer is yes, it is an harmonized standard. Why? Look at the Article 2 of Regulation 1025 that explains what is an harmonized standard. An harmonized standard is an European standard that is requested by the Commission to support EU legislation. So yes, it is an harmonized standard, but no, will not have an Annex A. No, will not go through the process that we have in place for performance-based harmonized standards. But it is important that you have these in mind. This is a step 3, how harmonized standards are. So performance-based harmonized standards are developed. This is not for the c-PCRs. It's always good to clarify that. First of all, of course, you need a standardization request because then you have the legal basis. For your information, we have a new process in place for the development of harmonized standards. This is quite new for the construction sector because, as you know, there has been a blockage for some years, so this is quite new. It brings some quite important elements that we hope it will help the technical committees. First point, the Haas assessment system will still apply for performance-based harmonized standards. There will be a max of 4 Haas assessments per, let's say, development of the standard. We are introducing as well a concept of the SEN quality check. So this will be done by CCMC. And the idea is really to support the technical committees to ensure compliance with the standardization request and with the criteria of the Commission that is quite well known. And the idea is really to improve the chances of technical committees to receiving compliant assessments by the consultants. I will not go through the process because we don't have that much time. But another important message to pass here is that in the context of the assessment of the harmonized standards by the consultants, for instance, the supporting standards, so the normative references like the c-PCRs will also be checked by the consultants in theory. So this is something that you need to have in mind. The SEN and SENELEC Technical Board have approved a revised version of the Guide 36. This is a very interesting document because it provides guidance to the technical committees when they are drafting performance-based harmonized standards for the CPR 305 from 2011. I don't know if you call it now the old, the current. I'm lost with that, but this document was urgently needed because we have a standardization request coming for precast concrete products, and we need to support this technical committee with guidance. For the environmental sustainability part that needs to be included in the harmonized standard, we have drafted model clauses to help not only this TC, future TCs as well. And yes, we are working together with the Commission to revise the Guide 36 to address the new requirements of the new CPR. So this is something that we have in mind. But I'm not foreseeing many changes for the environmental sustainability part. The template for the Annex A, it has also been revised. So this is only, again, for the performance-based harmonized standards, not for your c-PCRs. But I think it's quite worth to say that the template of the Annex A also includes now in the list of essential characteristics, the full list of characteristics for environmental sustainability. So do not touch them, don't delete things, just insert with information that it requires to be there. So I'm just concluding my parts. So these are the main aspects that the technical committees need to remember about c-PCRs. First of all, if you have a standardization request, if you are developing an harmonized standard, be aware that you need to have a c-PCR. That will be your assessment method for environmental sustainability. How urgent it is? Well, I would advise you to go to the CPR acquis priority list. If you are on top, it's quite urgent, so you need to speed up. If you are not on the first 10, and if you are in the middle or at the bottom, okay, not as urgent, but you need to start thinking that you need to have a standardization request. So I would invite that you start discussions already on the development of a c-PCR. Second point, of course, inform CNTC 350 Secretariat, quite obvious. In terms of drafting the c-PCR, there are a number of key messages that you need to have in mind. Use the templates. The recommendation from CCMC, and this is the part that no one will like, okay? The recommendation from my side is that the Commission is adopting a very legal approach when assessing performance-based harmonized standards. All the normative references need to be dated. And in addition to that, my advice to you is to date the normative references in your c-PCR. I know it's not ideal, but the Commission is taking a look at this, and we should date those normative the normative reference of the normative references need to be dated. If your c-PCR is included in a standardization request, if there is one, of course, follow the requirements that are there, include those requirements in your c-PCR. One of the rules is that we cannot offer to the European Commission for their assessment at the end of the process a performance harmonized standard that includes supporting standards, normative references that are draft standards. So ideally, your c-PCR should be published before the harmonized standards is published. So that's an important point. And be aware of the BT decision. Again, I don't get tired of insisting on this. So the BT took a decision saying your c-PCRs need to be aligned with the EN 1504, and you are encouraged to liaise with CNTC 350. Last slide. This is the overview of the existing c-PCRs. So in green are the c-PCRs that are published. Some of them are even being amended or revised right now. The yellow ones are the project that at least I found in the work program of many technical committees. So it's really important that you continue working on those documents. If you are on the top 10 of the priority list, then it's important that you speed up the work. If you are not on this list, then it's a call for you that you should be on this list. If I missed you, I'm sorry. But normally, I know there are some c-PCRs that are still not registered, and they are quite high in the priority list. So that's the message. Keep working on your c-PCRs because there will be an assessment method for harmonized standards. Thank you. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much, Nuno. I have, if I'm allowed to, I also have two questions for you. The first one is, so you talked about the HES consultant. Is it already clear whether that HES consultant and the quality check will also be applicable for the c-PCR standards? That's the first question, if that's already in place or not. And the second one, what if for product DCs, how to relate if there's no standardization request yet, and because the timing is often sharp, and so is there any view on that?
Well, for the c-PCR, I would say that if you are not included in a standardization request, then just develop your c-PCRs with your best knowledge, of course, as long as it is in line with the EN 1504. And also, you can try to speed up the process if you are on the priority list. But of course, you run a little risk that if you publish a c-PCR and then there is a standardization request with requirements for your c-PCR, it might mean that you need an amendment to your c-PCR. So this is an important point that you need to have in mind. But in any case, I think you're going to have probably a time frame of 3 years, hopefully, Oscar, to develop the c-PCR. So this is something that we need to have in mind. Concerning the assessment by the consultants of the c-PCRs, okay, I think Oscar would be in a better position probably to reply. I just mentioned that the general rule today, so we don't have additional agreements with the Commission so far, the general rule is whenever a consultant checks the performance-based harmonized standard, he or she is also supposed to take a look at the supporting standards. Why? Because the interpretation of the European Commission is that normative references form an integral part of the harmonized standards. But maybe, Oscar, I don't know if you have... Okay.
Okay. Of course, Jochen, you were waiting the first, maybe the front row, which was hasn't asked the question yet.
Good morning, thank you. I just wanted to ask if it would be possible to develop a c-PCR for intermediates such as chemicals. Thank you.
Personally, I don't see any issue to develop a c-PCR, but I don't know from the commission side if there is. For me, from a standardization point of view, there is no issue to develop a c-PCR. You can do whatever you want from SEN side. Then, if it's part of the harmonization system, this is something that we will need to discuss with the commission.
Now we'll go for Johan.
CPRs on the list in green. Do you expect that we will have to revise it to get the standardization request? I have no idea. What could the standardization request say that would not cause us to revise our PCR?
Well, I think the example that we had for precast concrete shows that the standardization request can put requirements on the scenarios to be included in your c-PCR. So at least for now, this would be one of the main aspects for you to have in mind. There could be additional rules as well coming from the European Commission, depending on case by case. But at least that, from our experience, which is very little, we only have one standardization request for construction products. Well, we have two, but okay, following the CPR acquis work, we only have one. So this is so far from our experience, one of the points that it could require modifications in your c-PCR.
And I go to the back. You have a question? Yep.
Thank you. And I have a question on the execution of the work. If you look at the progress of the team, you can see quite long list of.
Do you have the microphone on?
No.
Has to be read.
Yeah. I have a question on if you look at the work ongoing in the acquis process, you can see quite a long list of requirements being developed that will be part of the standardization request. That could also include some work that needs to be done on supporting standards. And that raises the question, what is the time frame to execute the work? I know of the normal time frame that would be there, but that could be quite challenging. Are there some thoughts about developing, let's say, a staged approach like we had in the past, where you had amendments to standards and full reviews, where you could work in packages, or do we still work on assumptions that we make a big jump from, let's say, basically a 10-year standstill in many of the standards to be fully up to date? Or can we foresee some kind of a stage execution of the standardization work? Also in sustainability parts. And the second question I would have is a question on eco-design. Will that be put in product requirements, or will it be put in c-PCRs?
The second question is for the second presentation of Oscar.
I think your question, Edmar, would be perfect for the track, okay? Because when we receive the standardization request, we're going to have the draft standardization request, sorry, we're going to have the list of standards to be developed. This is the moment that we need to comment, and if we think that there should be different phases for the development of the different harmonized standards, it is possible, as long as we convince the European Commission. And I think if a technical committee, for instance, NTC 88 has a lot of standards, a big volume of standards to be developed, so then this could be an approach to follow. If the Commission agrees, at least it could be requested by SEN. Very important is the supporting standards. So if you start working on the supporting standards and your harmonized standards all at the same time, there is a big risk that something will not be delivered on time. So for the supporting standards, I would say that already during the CPR acquis, or now that you start updating your supporting standards to avoid the risk that you won't have enough time to develop your harmonized standards. But the answer for me, it should be yes, we could have in the standardization request different stages for different standards to be delivered in different times.
Okay, I'll take two more then. Sir there, Rita, please. And then Barbara.
So
Two questions, sorry. First of all, it was not fully clear to me now. It was very interesting clarification on the sort of legal role of the c-PCR, saying that really depends on whether or not it's included in their standardization request. I don't understand based on what principles and how it will be decided whether to include it or not in the specific rights standard. Question for us. My other question would go back to the beginning of your presentation. I wonder about the real life role of the STRAC committees, because in actuality, it sounds like most of the actors there are already involved in the expert groups that we now have, the product rules, and there's a steering committee in the acquis process. So is there really going to be anything new discussed around that table? Is that more of a formality, or is that really a difference of the convolution?
Okay, so for the multiple platforms creating confusion for stakeholders, I understand. But you need to understand that from our point of view, the SHRAG is our sand kitchen. So the Commission is doing their work and they need experts to help the Commission to develop, to collect the input for the standardization requests. We also want to be part of the process, and the Commission is happy that we delegate our experts there. But then as soon as the Commission prepares the first draft standardization request, we have the document in our hands, and then we will create our own experts, okay, from the TCs. There are additional experts that are not in the CPR acquis. We have European organizations that are our partners. We could have some national members that are not in the CPR acquis. So we want to, or we need to have this open and inclusive process so we can involve everyone and then advise the technical board accordingly. You need to have in mind that the CPR acquis does not, I'm sorry I'm saying this, but the CPR acquis might deliver something that is not exactly what we want. And this is what happened with precast concrete and structural metallic products. There are more stakeholders involved. You have member states there. So this is why it is necessary to have the SHRAG group and discussions, so we can tell the Commission if there are some aspects that we think it could be improved, that we can let know the Commission about those points, and hopefully, well, then it's up to the Commission to manage the expectation of the different stakeholders with regards to the document. The first question, sorry, I forgot.
First question was, I would just wonder whether or
So
not.
there were two questions. I forgot the first one.
It was whether or not the c-PCR
okay.
will be included in our product standardization request or not. How will that be decided?
Yes. Yes, but we are including the c-PCR in all the standardization requests unless it's already available in a previous standardization request. So in principle, up to now, we have been including this in all the standardization requests. It's not automatically the case. We will discuss case by case, but I think for thermal insulated products, it will be easy.
Barbara? No, first Barbara.
Shall I go?
Yeah, go.
Okay. What if in the standardization request we deal with basic work requirement 8? Some products are considered facilitators for circular economy. So the standardization request clearly mentions this, for instance, dismantling or the circularity as a requirement. So shall we put this, or how do we deal with this requirement in our c-PCR? Is there the place to address this? Will we have to change our c-PCR, including that? But how can we do if by doing this we deviate completely? Thank you.
Maybe Oscar?
Yes, this is a bit more technical. This is not anything that will be in the scope of the c-PCR. So product requirements, environmental product requirements, will always go in a separate voluntary standard, if any. And the c-PCR cannot deal with this. And also, if we have, or in the strange situation, it may happen that we have an environmental essential characteristic that is different or is specific for a product family for any reason. I don't know now any example. this will be in the standardization request for the product standard, not for the c-PCR. So the c-PCR should focus on what it is. It's just limited to the implementation of 15804 to the product family covered by this c-PCR. Any other element related to environment, we have to see where it fits, but in principle, the c-PCR should only, is already enough and should only cover the, what we call now.
To close, Adi, you were waving hard.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, but what is that, when it comes to the consent request, and it is, of course, listing all the standards which are pharma standards which are part of that. What happens from consent point of view, it's clear that some of those are not going to be finished by the deadline. So is it possible from consent point of view and also commission point of view to delete some standards from the list and still be okay with the consent request or not?
Well,
It's the opposite question, but anyway, maybe it's possible.
yeah, maybe I can reply in theory. So I follow many sectors, not only construction. So I have some experience with standardization requests for different sectors. So in theory, yes, it is possible if we convince the commission and if we have a very good justification to ask the commission to produce an amendment to the standardization request to eventually change some deadlines, delete some standards. But again, this is up to the commission to decide because they are the only ones that can produce an amendment to the standardization request. Now you need to be careful, very careful with in the context of the new c-PCR. We need to be very careful not to develop some harmonized standards that are being requested because you do have the commission has the possibility to develop technical specifications themselves. So we need to be careful with this kind of requests because then we might have something else other than a standard being developed. So it should be in our interest to develop those harmonized standards. If there is an issue with deadlines, then we can ask the commission, for instance, for an amendment.
Yeah, again, from my point of view, I think it's important for us to know that when it comes to the subcommitted products, deadline is already half year from now, and we don't have the standard request officially yet. So that point of view, maybe we have to have some flexibility here.
Okay, we take a question, but I propose that the very specific product group questions that we try to solve that at another moment. I think that's the more efficient way. Okay, no problem. Okay, thank you for the questions, and then I'll hand over to Alessio, Secretary General of the IBM, because concrete and since a long time already.
So good morning. So I'm Alessio Rimonti, Secretary General of the IBM, Federation of European Precast Concrete Industry, also member of the board of Concrete Europe, umbrella organization of Concrete Value Chain and Construction Products Europe, European Association of Construction Products Manufacturers, member of both CNTC 229 for precast concrete and CNTC 350. So, yeah, yes, it's we have been discussing this morning, this part. I will not repeat. What I'm going to bring to you today is our experience as the first CNTC who was confronted with this topic. So really our case and focus on pragmatic topics. I will go through the legislative framework as well as the organizational framework that was described by Oscar and Nuno and explain how we try to address all this. I want to clarify that this was the way of TC 59. Doesn't mean that it is the only way, but it is how we have been addressing it. Talk a little bit about the challenges ahead and my advice to you on how to deal with it. So you consider the legislative framework, CPR, you have already seen this graph. First, very important point. We have a standardization request under the old CPR, 2011. So this is because of legal reason. When the standardization request was prepared, this new CPR was not yet in place. So all that I'm explaining to you is concerning the old CPR. Many things will be common, but not everything. Second point, the acquis process, just to give you an idea, for us, it lasted more than 20 months. So we started in July 2021 and finished in May 2023, just before the standardization request was issued. You can recognize there the milestone, and in particular in milestone 3, the part on the environmental assessment, sustainability assessment from the environmental point of view. That's concerning the acquis process. It has also been mentioned this the horizontal group on environmental sustainability. Well, as it is mainly dealing with the CPR 2024, for us it was more a kind of guiding principle. And in particular, as it has been mentioned before, on which clauses of the EN 1584 plus A2 do not apply, simply not because they are not compatible, but simply because the CPR regulatory framework defines. So, for example, all the several clauses in Chapter 5 of 1584 on the type of APD, ownership, additional information, communication format, and the Chapter 7, 8, and 9. As I said, it doesn't mean that it is contradictory. I'm simply saying that the CPR provision apply and take precedence over EN 1584. Concerning the standardization request, so I say we finished the acquis in May 2023. We got the first draft of the standardization request in September 2023, and it was finally voted for us in the Committee of Standard in February 2025. So also here there is some time to for this development. And yeah, what is the standardization request composed of? It's composed of legal text, as we all know, and 7 annexes. And I will now focus on the 3 ones, so Annex 2, Annex 3, and Annex 6, who have information about essential characteristics related to sustainability. So Annex 2 is about the requirement for the standard. So for each and every product family, we receive a list of all the essential characteristics, and it has been mentioned before. On the bottom, you can see environmental characteristics mentioned there with reference to basic requirement for construction work number 7, because we are still under the CPR 2011. Here you have the requirements, and in Annex 3, the essential characteristics related to dangerous substances and environmental sustainability are mentioned. And for environmental sustainability, what was already mentioned before, you will find basically 38 indicators of the EN 1584 plus reference service life mentioned at the beginning. And finally, in Annex 6, there is a specific annex on the harmonized scenarios. Also, this was presented by Nuno before. Here you will find, as it was mentioned also by Oscar, A1 to A3, nothing but starting from A4, the development of these harmonized scenarios, which complement what we already had in 1584, Chapter 7.3. I will now enter in the standardization framework, and again, with the focus on this environmental sustainability. So also this, mentioned by Nuno before, the struct, this is copy-paste from the SEN website. What is the struct? Is this body which ensures the coordination. And indeed, we have been working in the struct at two moments. First, when standardization request was delivered, to work on advising on problematic issues or on how SEN sees this standardization request. And then when the Committee of Standard approved the standardization request or towards the end, to give an advice to the SEN team to vote for it or not, so to accept or not this standardization request. At the level of TC, the standardization request for precast concrete products actually include also autoclave aerated concrete and lightweight concrete with open structure, which is standardized under TC 177. So 2 TCs for 1 standardization request. I think it's going to be quite similar for other that will not be alone. And I will come back to you this. But I'm talking today about SEN TC 229. maybe a few information about how our harmonized standards are structured and how we have changed also in line with the new standardization request. So today what we have 27 harmonized standards which make reference to what we call common rule and non-harmonized standard called common rule, so everything which is common to all the different products, which then make reference to let's call it supporting standard, the Encode, the Euro codes, and we have our own c-PCR, so again 16757, complementary product category rules for concrete and concrete elements. This is important information, which is a kind of standalone voluntary standard for providing EPDs. How we have to change the structure, we have to change the structure to be compatible with the new standardization. So now we have only one harmonized product standard, which will include all the different product families that before were developed into 27 harmonized standards, which make reference to supporting standards, like for example, test methods and the c-PCR. So I will explain you later more in the details how this interlink has been done. And then we will have a non-harmonized part for precast, for example, for production and things like this, which have nothing to do with the essential characteristics, which will be separated from the harmonized zone. So at the end, how do we quote the specifications for environmental assessment? Basically, we start from standardization request in the document, the input from the sector group 5, so from the horizontal group for what concern, for example, which part of the EN 1584 do not apply, and we come out with the harmonized standards with clauses and annexes in the harmonized standards, and the c-PCR for concrete and concrete element used as a supporting standard. As I say, this was our choice. Doesn't mean that this has to be the choice for everyone. And I will explain you also why we went through this approach. So how is an harmonized standard structured? Well, it is a general sense structure. You have the introduction, then you have characteristics, test assessment sampling, ABCP, ABS, annexes, and the Annex ZA. And now we will show you for each and every of these chapters how we have introduced environmental sustainability assessment. So in terms of characteristics, this comes directly from the Annex 2 of the standardization request. So we have the reference service life and all the 38 parameters from EN 1584 divided into 5 classes. So here you will really find the full list of 38 characteristics. In terms of testing, assessment, and sampling, well, here we have, for the reference service life, we make reference to the c-PCR for concrete, and only we had to add a distinction between off-the-shelf and made-to-measure products. This, for those of you who are into structural elements, you will probably recognize it. And for all the other environmental characteristics, for all the other 5 families, basically we have the same approach, reference to 1584 plus A2 and c-PCR for concrete, and a specification that this has to be, the assessment shall correspond for each module and each scenario. You know, the different approach in EN 1584 for EPDs, and this is coming from the CPR. Then we enter into the chapter 6, the station verification of constants of performance, old CPR, station verification system, new CPR. And we have introduced the environmental sustainability into 2 parts. First, in the ITP, in the initial type testing, the assessment of performance, where we make reference to the modeling applications that are applicable to the product. So again, reference to the c-PCR, and you have the link with the reference of characteristics of chapter 4 and the reference to testing, assessment, and sampling of chapter 5. The second part is about the verification of constancy of performance, nothing in particular in the factory production control, but a specific text for the initial inspection. Maybe I think it was mentioned before, we are under the old CPR, but with ABCP System 3 Plus issued with the Delegated Act in May of last year. basically we have the same system, system 3+ as with the new CPR. So initial inspection to validate that the environmental sustainability company specific data are there, with some clarification, for example, only when it is finalized, on the fact that all locations have to be included, the possibility to extend, how to extend environmental information from one side to the other, and the need for documentation. And then in the continuous surveillance of this is also nothing, but in other specific chapter or specific provision on environmental sustainability assessment validation. So what has to be validated? It is the ITT. It is the record of input values have to be validated corresponding to the product type, that the 1584 and c-PCR are properly used, and then the need to validate also the process and the software. In the annexes, we found there the link, the direct link between the harmonized standard and the c-PCR for concrete, where basically we say the c-PCR for concrete apply, except when there are some modification compared to the 1584 in reference to what was discussed into the result of 2025, and also which c-PCR clauses are not applicable. Again, look at the result of the SG5 on the horizontal code. And finally, Annex ZA is an harmonized standard, so we have an Annex ZA in it. And in this Annex ZA, we have the full list of essential characteristics. Again, it was mentioned before, as for all the other essential characteristics, with the clauses for the characteristics, the clauses for their assessment, stays no class, no threshold, and the reference limits. So that is a little bit how we have worked on it from our perspective. So this, we have decided to include the essential characteristics in the harmonized standard, which already exists, and use the c-PCR as a reference as supported. Other product families might choose a different strategy and develop really harmonized c-PCR. From our point of view, why we are going through this way, for several reasons. The first one, as I was mentioning before, EN 16757 is for concrete and concrete elements. Concrete is, until now, a non-harmonized product, so we'll continue issuing PPDs. Precast concrete it is, so when we started looking at changing the c-PCR, in almost all chapter we would have had to write, in this case, this applied, in this case, this does not apply, which doesn't make sense. Second point is that a harmonized standards has a given structure. I was telling you before, characteristics, assessment method, etc. A c-PCR follows the structure of EN 1584, so no real need to change the c-PCR from this point of view. And when the changes were necessary, we introduced them in the harmonized standard. The essential characteristic principles are already developed in the harmonized standard, but there was no need to copy it in the c-PCR. And finally, the c-PCR remaining separated to use as reference also by other PCs when we are dealing with the material form. So, to conclude, challenges ahead. I have to respect the 15 minutes. I think I'm in the time. Challenges ahead and some pragmatic advices. Challenges ahead, my view, but also view shared with many colleagues in Construction Products Europe. Well, on our side, very tight time frame, 15th of November to deliver the standard. So you can imagine that we didn't start in February of this year when standardization request was approved by the Committee of Standards, but we started very well before, but still very challenging. And also, once the standard is ready and available by SEN, it should be published in the official journal before the 8th of January 2026, when the new CPR will enter into application. The future of EPDs, we still don't know. We will need a transitional period because when the harmonized standard is published in the official journal, well, it's not that we will have all the environmental characteristics in the DOP available that day. It's impossible. So will need a coexistence period, hopefully of 2 years, to have all the system shifting from the EPDs to the DOPs. And more on the longer term, what will be the compatibility of the DOPCs? Will EPDs still be allowed? It seems that yes, if they contain the same, exactly the same information as the DOPCs, but still it is a question mark that our manufacturers are thinking about. And also, what is the link with the national databases? What will be their role in the future? How to deal with a transitional period of maybe 15 years where both the EPDs and the DOPCs will be available. ABCP system 3+. Now that the system is in place, will verifiers be available? That's a big question mark. Will they be available since January 2026? The physical inspections, I think that we all know about this issue of validation of data at the beginning, costs, timing. And finally, the acceptance on the market of this declaration on the DOPC, a market that now is used to the So these are all questions that we are asking ourselves. And finally, data, this is also has been mentioned, I think. What secondary background databases will be accepted? We had some answer from Oscar this morning. The issue with the work scale and the fact that all products must comply with the declarations. For the time being, we don't have any advice on the standard, but we will try to do that as more as an association with advice to our manufacturers from this point of view. And finally, what will be the future? It's a question that we have a lot of time. What will be the future of sectoral DOPCs in the field of environmental assets? So, conclude really pragmatic advices from my point of view. The development of the c-PCR starts well before you receive in your TC the standardization. We start with the acquis process. The acquis process is done for member states. But also be sure to liaise very well with member states at that moment, and not only as a sector organization or a TC. INSEN involved as a TC. I remember you the role of track, very important in different phases. c-PCR available is a good starting point. So if you are planning to do more or less what we did, and you don't have yet a standardization of rest, develop your c-PCR. Do that now within this framework. Recompile with EN 1584. That would be my advice. If you decide to develop something which is more harmonized, let's say, this is up to you, but take the decision as soon as possible. And finally, ensure cooperation between TCs. Under the same standardization request, there might be more than one TC. Different interpretation, different interests, but at the end, the same challenge. So really liaise with the RTCs under the same standardization request. Because also cooperation it is in dealing with the same material, but with different products to ensure consistency and think about the well-being of the users and not to over-regulate. And finally, time framing seems quite long, but also the work, it's a lot of work, so start as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before going to the floor for questions, I have a quick look to my left, also for the lunch. I don't know.
It's ready.
It's ready.
Whenever you
Can I have questions?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Then we have perfect. Then we have 10 minutes time for questions regarding the experience.
Yeah.
Everything was clear.
I think there is a lead.
I think so. I will first take Andrea and then for somebody.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. It was very fast. I know you have only 15 minutes, but to follow and digest all what was done, it's very difficult. So I just have a general question at this stage. I don't know unless you can reply this, but maybe you know more. I saw that you used a lot the help of SG5 during the development of the chapters. So yeah, you checked everything. So would this be for the other sectors the same, or SG5 will continue to exist, or will cease to exist and the other subgroups, sectorial subgroups will be left on their own with this and tackle with the outputs already developed by SG5. SG5 will stay there as an advisor and will help in the future to develop these chapters in environmental aspects of
I answered just for us. We follow from far SG5. We really tried to see in which direction it was going because it is for the new CPR, not for the old. But I think that for environmental sustainability, the same principle really applies. So we follow from far to see what was the view. On the future, I may let Oscar answer because if I don't know.
Maybe not to.
You mentioned that,
No, just a
No,
second,
no,
just a
no.
second. Oscar will reply first.
Delete your mic.
Okay, now, so this is a bit learning by doing. So we have the guidance documents in the group. We have revised you see that the planning every 6 months we are planning to revise the documents because we not only want to support the expert drafting the c-PCR, but also trying to improve the guidance to make sure that we deal with the problems. But I would say that the first step is really discuss internally in your PC, discuss with the experts that are drafting the standards for the product, and also I think the experts in sensitivity are also available for consultation. And then if you really see that you need kind of interpretation on what's the best approach for some elements, you can always consult our support.
I'll move up there. I just you, yeah.
Thank you. It's always good to have somebody who's been through the experience. Can I just ask the relation? I was a little bit confused between the relationship of your c-PCR standard and whether that was harmonized. I assume that wasn't harmonized, but the other standards were. But there's obviously a relationship, and was HAS accepting of that sort of method?
During the process we had, and this is maybe an advantage that should have put, but I tell you now, during the process, the communication with all departments sent and the commission is really very, very important. For us, I can say that they have been flexible to listen to what was our view on how to assess the question that they had. So discuss this with within SEN, within the commission. If you have ideas on how to answer the standardization request, check with them, check if this can be accepted. And in our case, that was accepted in the fact that say, okay, we will not change the c-PCR as it is now because it's already compliant with 1584, but we'll have to introduce in the harmonized standards those parts of the standardization request which are related to the c-PCR, but which we decided to put in the harmonized standards instead and not directly in the c-PCR. And so we did, for example, in the Annex 6 of the harmonized standards, where we specify how to implement the c-PCR. So we didn't change the c-PCR, and the additional request from the standardization request we put in the harmonized standard.
Thank you. Just to mention, I'm back in Manufacturing Association. I convene TC 163 with the full. For those products, we already have standard for sanitary ware, similar to the one that you have. So, and the other question, could you just go back through your slides? You quickly flagged up a table that referred to the environmental requirements. Further back, it was before your standardization framework.
Okay.
Annex 3.
You very quickly glossed over. I was a little confused as to what I was looking at.
This one is about the scenarios.
Yes. So what is that table referring to?
So in the standardization request, this is Annex 6, where the harmonized scenario that Oscar was discussing before, it is one of the main requests, let's say, of the CPR on the c-PCR. It is to have these European scenarios, parametric European scenarios that can be used by the one doing the life cycle assessment to have the same approach throughout all Europe. It doesn't say how many kilometers, for example, if we talk about transport, it doesn't say how many kilometers your product travel, but it says that if your product travel by truck, by boat, this is the way how to assess it, how to calculate it, basically.
Okay, that's Annex 6.
It's Annex 6 of the standardization request, which complements the N15 4 on chapter. This I don't remember.
Now it makes sense, yes. Thank you.
Okay, jump to Olympia. And then.
I hope you can hear me. Alessio, I think we passed one of the really important points we have on the table, which is the background databases. Another popular area. Can you share some objectives of the legal advice that you will give to your members around this topic? This is, very well, this is one of the topics I've heard. The manufacturers, I mean, there are many legal focus points, there are many open cost points for the whole implementation of the system, but I mean, there is no consensus at the same time of the expert group. I mean, how are you going to handle it?
I don't know. I have to be frank. I think that this is something that we should discuss more, let's say, together with other partners in construction products Europe, for example, or with other manufacturers, because it's not, we should not give me giving one thing, you giving a different one, and now I'm giving a different one. I think that we have to have a common approach to it, and today I do not know what to say to you. So that's why I think that 2 years of coexistence period from January 2026 to January 2028 are really necessary.
Why do you?
Wait. Mike.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Wait, Ari, first, and then.
Is me now?
No, wait.
No.
Yeah.
It's okay. But it was okay. It's right. So, why did you select for going from 7, let's say, different RMI standards into just 1? And let's say, and will it, let's say, will it allow you for flexibility? Because then, if you are changing something, then let's say every time you have to let's say to ask for a new standardization request. So because we have all a lot of standards with regard to our probably we are number 21, but fine. So what was the reason?
Yeah, indeed. Before that was our system before. The fact is that now all data or references must be dated. First point. Before we have these common rules where we could change, for example, something is changing in the production process, we change there and we change automatically for the 27 products. Today it's not going to be possible anymore with the new system because of dated references. So if we change something in the common rules, we should have changed everything in 27 product standards. So if there is something which is common to all the construction products, all the different product families, we should have changed anyhow the 27 for the reference. So this was one of the reasons. And probably the main one. It's not going to be, from our point of view, more flexible to have 27 harmonized product standards because if something changed, for example, tomorrow we'll have the new standardization request under the new CPR in 4 or 5 years. Imagine to have to change 27 product standards harmonized at the same time and including all of them the same change because of the new CPR. So we said, let's put everything into one. And from a technical point of view, that yes, definitely we will try and collect everything under the usual SEN review period of 5 years. And if there are also technical changes, they can be included in this period. But we have had problems of, only half of the standard will refer to a new, for example, the new standard in Europe, not Europe, but in this case, but if there is a change in one of the standards, you have to change the 27 sort of the different.
Last question for Adi then.
Yes, thanks. Yes, thanks. Yes, my point of view is maybe for Alessio. First, that okay, when you have this request and you are not, let's say that you are not able to provide all of your standards at the same time, is that okay? But at the same time, when it comes to c-PCR, I mean, this is the most important point of the new system what we have now here. I think that at least should be there. So I think that is the one standard that you have to have according to the regulation. But meaning at the same time that you have to also update your c-PCR. It's up to the commission to decide that, but okay.
It's more a dialogue with the commission. If SEN or if ETC as a pragmatic implementation, which fulfill the wish of the commission, in our case, it has been, okay, this is the wish. We are going to do that in a slightly different way. If it's still in the framework, in the legislative framework, because the commission cannot go outside of its own framework, but if it is still in the framework and the objectives are achieved, there was always a lot of cooperation.
Okay.
Okay, and sorry, maybe one more thing. Coming with this is that okay, when you have these c-PCRs, so the difficult point, as we know, is the reference service life and how to handle that. So is that the point that the commission wants that you have to deal with, or is that?
In our c-PCR, we already have point about the reference service life, and it is important to this, and that's also why I made a distinction between off-the-shelf and made-to-measure products. Off-the-shelf are products which are made really in series, put there, and on which there is indeed the demand to go a little bit more in the assessment of the reference service life. For made-to-measure products, in principle, you know in which building or in which construction work they will go, so you know the reference service life of the work, and therefore it's kind of easier because it corresponds to the work for which it has been done.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Lunch is waiting. You have 1 hour to eat and digest.
Okay, but this solution will allow us in theory to continue sending these applications with this.
Hope you had a nice lunch. Thank you, Sen, for offering it. Let's get things started again. We have an interesting afternoon, I think. First, Oscar will continue on the link of what we are doing, declaration of performance environmental characteristics and with other EU legislation. So it's not, as mentioned before, it's not one purpose only. Then Julia will continue on what does this in practice really mean to develop a c-PCR, what is the relation with TC350. Then we have a presentation on the some gaps, and there is an exercise ongoing to collect gaps and issues on standardization. And just for information, Erik Pennings is excused because of some serious family hospitalization in his family. So I will take over his presentation as good as possible. Okay. But so now I hand over to Oscar.
Afternoon. So it's difficult to start after the nice lunch, and I hope you will not fall asleep. But I have a very interesting topic. So this is the question from everybody. We are spending a lot of efforts, money to really deliver environmental information under the CPR, but what about the other regulations? I have ETS, there is eco design, we have the taxonomy. So these guys of the commission are doing a lot of things. And is there a plan or how it fits together? Okay, I can tell you that there is a plan. I am not sure of the quality. I think it's quite good. I would prefer to have it even better, but what I will try to explain is more or less what is behind all this work and how the different elements connect each other. But also you have to think that we have different purposes. So every legislation have their own goals. So EPBD is dealing with the environmental performance of buildings. CPR is focused on placing products on the market and the internal market and competitiveness. Other regulations like ETS are focused on reduce the environmental emissions of factories. So how everything fits together is sometimes a bit of a challenge because it's difficult to look at different directions, but find always the same solution. And this is what I'm trying to explain. The first part is a bit the easy one, because the ESPR, the Eco Design for Sustainable Product Regulation, and the CPR are both product policy. So it's for products placed on the European market. This is the part that is easy because we are covering the same approach. What is not so easy is that the scope of the Eco Design and the scope of the CPR overlaps. So what is the scope of the CPR? Any product that is permanently installed in buildings. So it's a lot. What is the scope of ESPR? Any product placed in the European market. That's really very broad. So in principle, it may happen that the product falls under both. In both, we sometimes establish obligations and sometimes not. In the eco design, we establish obligations if the product is covered by a delegated act. In the CPR, we establish obligations if the product is covered by a harmonized standard. You know that. But the case of steel is a case of a product in which there will be probably a delegated act for eco design, and there will be also a harmonized standards. There are already, there will be harmonized standards for steel products, for example. And how it works? It works in the way that we are making sure that the information that is calculated for eco design for steel as intermediate product is as far as possible introduced as an input value for the CPR. In other words, we need to make sure that the methodology used in eco design and the CPR, even if they are not exactly the same, at least is really reliable. And we have the possibility to recognize the assessments under the eco design through the CPR. What is the final goal? The final goal is that the information delivered by the CPR, even with the input from the eco design, is used in the European and national legislation. In other words, you have in the end a declaration of the performance of the product that you can use in levels, for example, for the EPBD. You can use also the information in the taxonomy if there are specific product requirements, and or in any other policy. We have also I have to mention that the issue with taxonomy is that the delegated act for taxonomy was implemented before we really introduced environmental provisions in the CPR. But these delegated acts will be updated, and hopefully the data from the CPR will be used as a reference. So as you see, there are different goals. This is kind of, we call default approach, is the most complex approach. It may happen to other products, to chemicals, to anything that will be covered in eco design. There is also a situation for some products which are not necessarily having obligations under the CPR. So these are the boilers, the air conditioning. These generally are only regulated under the eco design. So in this case, the system is not going through the CPR, so I'm not involved, But what we need to make sure is that the information delivered when they will revise the eco design requirements is enough to be integrated into the calculation of levels and any other policy that address the final product. So I know it's a bit of a challenge because traditionally these regulations, the eco design was really focused on consumer and labeling, but we need to make sure that there is also additional information that can be used to satisfy the other regulatory requirements. And again, this also applies to the national provisions, but in the CPR is very clear. In the CPR, we always say national provisions are only use information for the CPR. In eco design, the policy is not so focused on this. And there is an easy case, which is, for example, gypsum, that is not in the work program of eco design. In this case, you are in the field of the CPR. We will establish obligations under the CPR, and then this information will go to the other national or European legislation. What is the situation that is not in this picture about the products that are not in the harmonized zone, the products for which there is no standards? They can go to IOTA to ask for an EID, but the usual practice will be that they will deliver the information through EPDs. So the voluntary EPDs will always stay for the products for which there is no regulatory implementation under the CPR, which is, as I said at the beginning, a lot of products. When we will start harmonizing more and more and more, this area will be a bit smaller. And as you know, there are different policies. Probably the most relevant is the EPBD because it has very clear time frame and very clear goals. And we are already working on the implementation. You know, it was adopted also last year. And there are very clear goals to make sure that the buildings, in particular new buildings, but also at one point there will be horizontal obligations, will really have a very low environmental impact. So something that is important to mention is that I'm going to speak a lot about full life carbon, but the information from the CPR is also used for the energy performance. So if you do a calculation of the energy performance of building, you will need to use the information from the front. And we are now discussing, for example, in every CPR acquis group, how the information should be delivered to make sure that we do the calculation at building level. As I said, the EPBD is very broad. I think there is a limited really impact of products in the regulation. You have also design, you have a lot of provisions, but what we need to make sure is that what we deliver really works in the context of the EPBD. And maybe the most relevant that is directly connected to the work of CNTC 350 and the c-PCR is the new obligation for the calculation of life cycle global warming potential of new buildings. This is a short summary of how it works. So you see that it's only addressing CO2 emissions. Of course, they don't really care about the other indicators. This can be done at national level, but not in the EPBD. The calculation is per square meter of useful floor area. The reference period is 50 years. This is in the regulation, so it's fixed. What is important is that the modeling is 5978. The standard is under revision, so the methodology is really following the traditional approach of EPDs and the levels framework, which is also connected to this standard. What is I think the main message? There is an ongoing revision of the Annex 3 in which the methodology is really fully detailed. The Annex 3 will be revised by the end of this month, because this year. There is already an ongoing discussion with member states and stakeholders to see how this is introduced. And I would say that the main added value or the main element of this discussion now is to make sure that if the information comes from the CPR, this is kind of the highest level of information. So you will always need to use the information from the product, which is really the real added value for you as manufacturers to deliver this information through the CPR, because it will be the source of information. So there is no possibility to go for databases or other systems if there is information that is already delivered under the CPR. What happens if it is not available? Member states will create their own systems, transition systems, until the information is delivered and for the products which are out of the harmonized zone. So in principle, what we need to do is to make sure that all our calculations are really fitting with the effective 978 and deliver enough information. But please don't focus only on buildings. I always say that. I know buildings is very important, they have a framework, but we also want to reduce the environmental impact of civil engineering works and other constructions. So it's important, and sometimes it's the most impactful works are not really buildings. I know it's very obviously targeted by European legislation, but we need to deliver information in a broader context. What you saw was declaration, but the regulation, the directive, sorry, it's not a regulation, sorry, also established the need to publish roadmaps with the idea of reducing the environmental impact, the CO2 emissions. So it means that just by declaring the CO2 emissions will not be enough. So in the coming years, there will be a pressure to reduce the environmental impact of buildings. What is the positive element of this approach is that the reduction is at building level. So we are not having reduction of CO2 emissions at product level, it's at building level. This gives the designer and everybody the possibility to really choose and design the buildings in the best way. And I think this is quite an important step because, you know, I have been involved in CPC 350 for years. And one of the mantras of this TC is always focus on building level, never do comparison at product level. This is exactly what we have here. So I hope the directive will make sure that this is really the approach, and we do not start a stupid competition on minor comparison of products while the big picture is overlooked, which is sometimes the case when you have this product comparison. And well, before going to the digital product passport, I think there are other initiatives that are very relevant. As I said, the taxonomy. Taxonomy is focused on financial. There is an ongoing discussion about how this will evolve. Every 3 years, the delegated acts will be revised. And I know there are some concerns about how it is reflected, the properties of the product. My point is that every time, this is not so much for the environmental part, more for the other part. If you are already discussing in your c-PCR and your CPR acquis subgroup essential characteristics, it's important that you find the essential characteristics that will be relevant for the taxonomy. And we will try to make it work in the next revision. So this is a message that is important for you. There is another policy that is European that is also creating a lot of questions, but I think there is also a way forward, is the ETS and CBAM. This is only relevant to some industries. In this case, we are already working. In the last meeting of the subgroup, we already were discussing how the environmental data from ETS could be used in the environmental assessment under the CPR. Again, not an easy topic because the approach, as I said, is different. Industrial emission versus product placed on the market. There is a limited scope in the ETS that is expanded in the CPR. But we are also expecting that if there is good data and reliable data, we could use it. And we have even the tools to do it in the regulation. So you see that all the elements are connected. Sometimes the link is very obvious and clear, like EPBD, CPR for the EPDs, taxonomy and the others have a link that require a bit of work or a bit of alignment, but we hope that this will really make sense. And everything what I said only works with the digital product passport, because you have seen how it works for EPDs. It's a very complex document. Other policies, for example, EPBD will just select CO2 emissions. ETS is even less than that. We have different policies addressing specific pieces of information and require complex calculations. So this will never work unless we really digitalize it in the proper way. And this is why we have the digital product passport. Being a market instrument is the same system that will be introduced in the eco design for sustainable product regulation. So if a product is covered by both, the same access point will give you access to the documents of the CPR and ESPR. So this is how it will work. And the idea is really to make sure that this is becoming kind of one-stop shop for the customer. So the customer scan the QR code and get the data. We can have the data for the CPR, data for REACH, data for eco design, also compliance with machinery and other regulations. The idea, this is the kind of folder where we will try to integrate all this information. It's easy to say, not so easy to implement, because sometimes you have the granularity may make your life a bit difficult as a manufacturer. But we think this is how we will make sure that we simplify and we facilitate not only the work of the manufacturers delivering the data, but also the recipients of the products. And also, I think it was in my last point, why we need a European framework, because this is the only way that it really works with regulatory information. Voluntary systems can be useful, can deliver part of information, but in the end, you need to make sure that it goes to the same regulation to ensure that it's really the one-stop shop. Otherwise, we will have plenty of systems, and we have been already experiencing this in BIM. So we are quite ambitious in the DPP. We want to make sure that the contents, the governance, the interoperability, the access, and the stability is fully implemented and granted, which is a bit of a challenge. And we are really having an implementation that will take a bit of time, but you see that we are planning to adopt a delegated act and make the system ready at around 2028. So in practice, for most of the products under the new CPR, they will already start to be CE marked according to the new CPR with a digital product passport. Only if your standards are ready in 2027, you may have a period in which you have a declaration of performance that is not in the digital product passport. But for all of you who are already a bit in the pipeline for standardization requests, probably you will already have a digital product passport. And we are now discussing how the system will be implemented in practice, just to make sure who will host the data, how it will be hosted. Because as I said, the idea is that in any time you can access the data and there is no broken links, and there is really a continuous access to the information. So this is our main concern now. We are, as I say, almost finished our study, and we will take the first steps to draft the delegated act that will implement this. The information you see, I think, is very important. You see the documents from the CPR, but also the documentation required under other union law, which helps you to make sure that this will really work. Here you can have eco design, you can also have other regulations, you can have information related to other policies. And the idea is that, as I said, this really becomes really the entry point for the information. And that's a bit the summary. I know it's difficult, specifically if you are an LCA expert or you are very focused on the CPR or on EPDs, to see the big picture, but I can tell you that really there is another value of delivering so much information. There are also ways to ensure that these will really be used in the right way. And we have been working in the Commission to try to reduce the burden of dealing with different regulatory frameworks at the same time. And in the case of the CPR, I hope also that the harmonized area really limits the possibilities of member states to create systems that really suppose an additional layer of complexity and really complicate the life of manufacturers. But you know, this is really an element that is in the CPR, not necessarily in other policies. So that was all from my side.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Oscar. Yeah, same as in the morning session. Does anyone have a question for Oscar? Go ahead.
Sure. I mentioned. I have two questions, Oscar. One is on you mentioned when you talk about levels, that focuses on CO2, that member states can have additional requirements. How does that align with the timeline that we have in CPR, where mandatory declaration of other characteristics than CO2 are put in timeline, pushed a bit forward? And the second question I would have is, if you look at eco-design, as a general regulation brings forward a number of additional elements, characteristics of products, when you make requirements on mandatory recycled content, the way how to produce it, emissions, whatever. How would they be incorporated? Because construction products were left out of eco-design because it would be incorporated in one way or another in CPR. Is my understanding correct that it would be in the part of making product requirements, and what is then the timeline for introducing those and making this kind of requirements? Could it be at the same time of the standardization request for the other characteristics of the criteria, or would it be at a later stage? If so, what would be that time?
Okay, for the first question, the mandatory declaration at European level is really the minimum. But if a member state requires, for example, eutrophication as an indicator, all the product placed on the market, on this market, will also need to declare this. So if you place a product in the market in which this additional indicator for the environmental assessment of the building is needed, you will need to do it. And this is the same way it works for other essential characteristics. So in practice, if for example, a country decides to ask for the full list, the manufacturer will have to declare the full list. Even in the regulation, there is only obligation for CO2 emission.
So is that, what do you mean by the manufacturer has to be there? It still remains a voluntary declaration. You may place the product on the market without declaring, right?
You will not be allowed to install it, but yes, you can place it on the market.
Very much. That's it.
Thank you for the correction. Yeah, exactly. So in practice, the system works in this way. So if you want to install it, you will need to declare it. Otherwise, you cannot install it. So that's the approach. For the second.
Basically, that means that the timeline for actual practical need to declare other environmental performance characteristics than CO2 is determined by member state regulation. So if, for example, in the Netherlands, you would have the basket of the environmental performance of the building, including all characteristics of the EPD, then all EPD characteristics are mandatory if you want to put it on the Dutch market.
If you want to install it, you can place it on the market, but not install it. Yeah, exactly. Okay, the second question is about eco-design. Okay, so you saw the diagram at the beginning with the eco-design first and then the CPR. If the eco-design establishes a requirement, this requirement needs to be fulfilled before. So if there is minimum recycled content for steel, and this steel is using a CPR, you need to fulfill this requirement first. And then only if you fulfill this requirement, you can also regulate under the CPR. And in the CPR, we have a stricter requirement if we want. Okay. How we can impose it? Also with product requirements, so the bottom branch in my presentation in the morning, or also with an essential characteristic and a threshold. I have a mandatory threshold, so minimum, whatever. Okay. The CPR contains more or less a lot of the elements that are also in eco-design. Why? Because we didn't want that there was a kind of reason to go for eco-design for construction products because the regulation didn't allow it. So in principle, as I said, they are complement each other, and you will always need to fulfill the situation that is more restrictive. So if you have a construction product as is covered by the CPR and the ESPR, you will need to fulfill the conditions established by both regulations. If it is only eco-design, only eco-design. If it is only CPR, only CPR.
If we have the discussion at national level in acquis, is the scope of that discussion, let's say 1584, or is the scope sustainability, including eco-design, additional thinking, like recyclability, recycled content, other sustainability elements? And should that be discussed and brought forward in the acquis, or is there a separate process in parallel that discusses the additional sustainability characteristics apart from 1504?
It's the same process, but what we need to satisfy in the CPR acquis is the regulatory demands of member states. So that's why we usually go for EPD information, because it's what they usually regulate. But if a country regulates another performance, we will include it also as an essential characteristic. And if the requirement is applicable to all Europe, we will introduce it as a horizontal requirement. As I said, the CPR is delivering information that fits with the national needs of the national building codes. The eco-design is more a market tool. That's why the scope are not exactly the same. And that's why we focus a lot on the environmental information of the buildings, and in eco-design, they are more focused on the product itself. But both frameworks can deliver information and requirements in both fields. But we usually do not have so many inputs from regulators on the elements that are discussed in eco-design.
If we now have the processes on the thermal insulation products.
Sorry, sir. Sorry,
Do
we have to stop.
Complaints on.
Sorry, we have to stop.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's becoming too bilateral,
Yes.
and it's not. Maybe afterwards. I'm sorry. I think we have to move on. And maybe there's another possibility. Let's see what the next presentation brings. And we need to move on, otherwise we run out of time. Let's move to Julia. Thank you also for answering the questions. Yeah, sorry. Julia, who's convener of working group 3 in TC 350, and also working at Sphera as a director, and who's a big support at the work of TC 350. And she will explain the relation between the development of c-PCR and TC 350.
Thank you, Dieter. Hello, everybody in the room and also online.
Your mic, please.
My mic is turned off. Okay. Like this? This is fine. Okay. Hello. Good afternoon to the people here in the room as well as the people online. Title of today's workshop is the development of c-PCRs under the CPR. And from Oscar, we learned this morning the requirements. And I also heard that EN 15804 plays a role. That's why I'm here. I'm the convener I have the pleasure to be the convener of this working group, TC 350, working group 3. And I would like to also say this is a group of incredible expertise in the field of EPDs. Last week, we had our working group 3 meeting. There were 50 people. So this is really a big expertise of LCR and EPD experts. We developed the EN 15804, and we are the group following the BT decision that is commenting your c-PCRs. And in my presentation, I hope I can give you a short introduction on EN 15804 and the content of EPDs, and maybe there are some tips and tricks that help you and us to streamline the process and to make the whole c-PCR developing process easier. Okay. EN 15804 are the core rules. So sustainability of construction works, environmental product declaration, basic rules for the product category construction products. These are all construction products. Beside this EN 15804, which was mentioned several times today, we have also developed other standards, like one standard for the digitalization. We have developed a standard for business-to-business communication, a standard for business-to-consumer communication, as well as a standard for data quality. I think it's worth to mention this because some of these standards also will play a role in the whole CPR acquis process. So for the ones that would like to look them up and read them, here's the list of the different standards that were developed within the last years by CENTIC 350 Working Group 3. Okay, now let me give an introduction what an EPD is, because a lot of elements from an EPD will enter into the Declaration of Performance and Conformity. EPDs are based on EN 15804. These are documents of approximately 10 pages. And EPDs, they contain the results of life cycle assessment of a product and contain the results of the cradle to grave. I don't know if you are all LCA experts here in the room and online. If not, maybe allow me to just say 2 or 3 minutes what an LCA is. According to the standard, it's defined as a compilation and evaluation of the inputs and outputs and the potential environmental impacts of a product's life cycle. Okay, what does this mean in practice? If you want to conduct a life cycle assessment, first of all, you need to collect a couple of data in your company for the manufacturing process. For instance, how much electricity consumption is needed to manufacture, let's say, a floor covering? How much thermal energy is needed? You need to collect the data for the material that is used. You need to collect the data for the waste and for the water that is used. So all this data needs to be collected by the manufacturer. Additionally, as we talk from cradle to grave, there is also a certain, let's say, diesel consumption for the transport and maybe for the installation, glue that is needed. So this comes on top. Then input and output flows, the use stage. Imagine a floor covering needs to be cleaned on a regular basis over a certain lifetime. This comes with electricity consumption, water consumption, maybe some cleaning detergents that are also needed. And then last but not least, the end of life. So the modules C and D, they also bring a certain impact for the recycling process or maybe for the waste incineration process. But this is the data, these are the inputs and outputs that first need either to be collected by a manufacturer or scenarios that the manufacturer needs to think about, reflect on this, for instance, the frequency of the cleaning of a floor covering. The kilogram, kilowatt hours, kilometers collected by the manufacturer are then transferred and translated into, let's say, a carbon footprint or the acidification potential, so a life cycle assessment result. This exercise needs to be done for an EPD, but please think also about scope 1, 2, 3, because it's very close linked to scope 3 emissions. And also for the eco-design, an LCA might help because the manufacturer could then reflect, okay, if I use more recycling material as an input material, or if I use green electricity, how can I bring the environmental impact down? Because our aim is for Europe to become carbon neutral by 2050. And here we are today, and 2050 would then be 0. So hopefully this gave you an idea on what an LCA is, and that maybe the exercise that takes some time because you need to collect, the manufacturer needs to collect all the data, but could also be beneficial for other activities that we see in Europe and that are important to decarbonize in the future. Okay. Back to the EPD. EPD is independently verified, thus has a high level of credibility, and it follows the rules of so-called product group specific rules, the PCRs. Okay, now let's dig a little bit deeper into how an EPD looks like. These are I would say, the key elements of an EPD. You have the verification part. Here, probably in the future, the notified bodies will play an important role. The product description is also part of the EPD in order to understand, is this now an apple or is it an orange? Yeah, this is also very important when it comes to comparisons. And then you see the heart of every EPD, the LCA results. Structured in so-called modules. So we start A1, A2, A3 is the product stage, from cradle to factory gate. And the cradle for an LCA is for wood, for instance, the forest. For mineral material, it would be a quarry. For, let's say, plastic or a synthetic material, it's crude oil. Then we have the life cycle stage construction process, A4 and A5, the transport to the point of installation, as well as the installation as such. The use stage is for some construction products relevant, for others not. So in this case of a floor covering, module B2, for instance, the maintenance would be relevant. Operational energy use, so module B6 is relevant for energy consuming construction products. And then we have the end of life, the demolition, the transport, waste processing, disposal, and then the recycling potential. Why do I go in detail? And I don't know, maybe this is a little bit, you already know this, but why I mentioned this, let's say EBC, EPD ABC is, in your product TCs, you need to reflect on scenarios from A4 to C4, and you also need to define requirements for A1, A2, and A3. That's why maybe it's good to get a little bit familiar with this terminology. Okay, and at the end, we have then the table with results, global warming potential, ozone depletion potential. This is the core of every EPD. On my next slide, I have, yes, this will probably be the homework. And Oscar, you presented something similar this morning. This is the homework to define the scenarios. The product TCs need to reflect on the different modules. For A4, for instance, what is how is it transported to the point of installation? A5 is the installation. Are there any additional raw materials needed? Need the floor covering to be glued? Is there any electricity that needs to be used? Then we have the maintenance, B2, but it could also be B6 if this is an energy consuming construction product. And then you need to reflect in your product TC group on the end of life. What is an appropriate end of life scenario, and is this realistic? Yeah, please reflect. Is there any energy consumption needed to extract it from the building? What are the transport distance? So imagine there's one recycling facility, let's say in Berlin. You need to consider the transport distances to this recycling facility. So this need to be realistic scenarios. Yeah, so just maybe to bear this in mind, this will probably be discussions that you need to moderate or that you will have in your product TC when developing c-PCRs. Okay, now to ensure the principle of comparability for one product group, we need the product category rules. Because, for instance, coming back to the floor covering example, what is the cleaning regime for floor coverings in hospitals, in hotels, maybe in, or let's say in an industry hall? Here, fair and clear rules need to be established. And this needs to be done in the PCR document. So overall, product group is a group fulfilling the same function. It's clear you have the product TCs, and the complementary product category rule comes on top to EN 15804. So please first read EN 15804 and then reflect on what additionally do you need to define for your specific product group. What we are expecting in the future, and I love this image, although it's not construction product related, but this is what we are expecting in the next years in CENTIC 350 Working Group 3, because we will be confronted with a lot of c-PCRs, and we need to comment them all. And I think this is a nice image to show what, let's say, workload we are expecting in the next months and years. We saw this morning. Nuno, you already introduced the different c-PCRs that are published or that are already in the pipeline. So you are all aware of that PCRs are already published and that a couple of activities are already taking place to develop c-PCRs. Okay, now I hope you are now all very motivated to create your own c-PCRs. What we offer is that we offer templates that you can start with this exercise. We provide templates. We are the point of contact in case of questions before the inquiry. You are always welcome in, let's say, 10 or 15 minutes presentation in the working group 3 meetings to present your questions. We comment the c-PCR in working group 3 meetings during the inquiry. And imagine last week we had 50 people in this meeting. So this needs to be well prepared in order that I'm able to moderate this whole exercise. So please be prepared, send us the ready to go c-PCR so that we manage to comment this in our meetings. We check the compliance with EN 15804 plus A2. And let's say 3 weeks ago, I added the point, we cannot give guidance on LCA. Yeah. The hotspots. What are the hotspots for the different product groups in terms of LCA? This is something that you need to figure out maybe with an LCR consultant or maybe with expertise in your product DCs. But this is nothing that working group 3 can offer, that we can let you know, okay, what are the relevant raw materials for a floor covering, for instance. So it's highly recommended to start this exercise with an LCR preliminary study or with expertise that you gained during EPD projects. So this is very important. We cannot give any LCR consultancy in this from this working group 3 group. And now your list is a bit longer. Okay, but anyway, overall, the product TC is responsible for the content of the c-PCR. As I mentioned before, we highly recommend conduct a preparatory LCR study. Yeah, so following ISO 14025, which is years old, this is the normal starting point. You need to identify what are the hotspots. Is this during the production stage, or is it the use stage, or the end of life? You need to draft your c-PCR and define, for instance, the functional unit, square meter, a ton, meter, whatever. You need to define the technical properties to be mentioned in the EPD. You need to specify certain LCA requirements if needed, for instance, the allocation of loads to co-products. You need to define plausible and realistic scenarios for the use and the end of life. Please involve us in the inquiry and follow up the treatment of comments. So normally you send the c-PCR document, we comment, you get this nice send document with the comments. We hand this over to you and you need to reflect on our answers and please reply to them. Please involve us again before you send it to formal vote, because that we can cross-check if everything was included into your c-PCR draft in order to avoid any misunderstandings or problems during the formal vote process. What we highly recommend is when you are, let's say, completely new in this field, a good starting point is always you can check PCR documents from product TCs. Yeah, so there are a lot of EPD programs in Europe and worldwide, and this can always be a good starting point to find some inspiration what to write into the PCR document. Conduct an LCR study so that you are clear about from an LCR perspective, the hotspots. Also try to identify linked product groups. An example is glass and windows, for instance. Yeah, so there are materials or even intermediate products that enter into your c-PCR, so reflect on this. Also highly recommended, involve experts and stakeholders with expertise in the PCR development process, LCR expertise of different life cycle stages, the use and end of life. So, you know, I'm an LCR practitioner and a lot of my customer, let's say, they would like some recycling at the end of life. Because the competitor also has some recycling at the end of life, but it needs to be realistic. I need a proof. Yeah, you need to give proof that recycling is possible and that you can transport your product at the end of life to this recycling facility. Proof is needed. Yeah, so that's why I think it makes absolutely sense that also the actor at the end of life are involved. I used to work at a waste management company at the beginning of my career, and I never heard of EPDs or what, and I was not interested what the manufacturer does. I have my own world, I have my waste, but reach out to the actors at the end of life and ask them, how do you collect it? Shall we separate it? How can we make recycling live? That's why. So I can just recommend to involve the actors at the end of life, so the waste management companies in this exercise. Okay, I mentioned this working document. So if you write to the Dean Secretary, Milan Kabakov, who also does an incredible job, I would say, in this context, because it's not easy to follow up all the c-PCRs. He will send you this template, and it looks like this. You see the different columns. The number that you see here are exactly the clauses that you have in EN 15804. Clause is then your title, introduction, terms and definition, abbreviation, objective of the core PCR. Please follow exactly the structure of EN 15804. This makes the commenting process easier, and this also makes the harmonization of different c-PCRs easier if you all follow the same structure. Then I included now some elements from EN 15804 plus A2 in the second but last column. For instance, you have terms and definition, additional technical information, auxiliary material, average data, and so on. And then for your specific c-PCR, the column in the middle, reflect on, do you need additional terms and definitions? If you are fine with the definitions from EN 15804, just write as in EN 15804 plus A2, but maybe in addition, we define secondary material like this, or we define, I don't know, our material in a certain way. So just add them. So what we are expecting is not a duplication of EN 15804, but that you reference EN 15804 and just put the additional aspects into the document. Yeah, this is what we offer. And when it comes to the scenarios, this is now, these are two screenshots from EN 15804. So I already mentioned, please do your homework, reflect on the use stage, reflect on the installation. But EN 15804 can also give you a lot of guidance. Yeah, I would say start with EN 15804. And here for the use stage, for instance, please reflect, are there any maintenance processes? Are there any maintenance cycles? Do we need water? Do we need electricity? Same for the use of energy, for instance, define the scenarios in order that you have later EPDs or declaration of performance that are on a level playing field and allow in a certain way a fair comparison. This is my recommendation, to have a look at EN 15804 plus A2. So with this, I'm at the end of my presentation. I hope it contains some tips and tricks. Ask me now, ask me later. We know that there are probably questions, and let's see. There are a couple of questions. Dieter, you?
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
One question? No, just kidding.
Choose the easiest one.
No, take the one who I haven't heard. Yeah, you.
Could you put the microphone?
We are doing our c-PCR, and I'm quite surprised you say that we have to contact you. Isn't it automatic? Like, isn't it said we will take care of all this relationship with you? We have to contact, is it me who has to contact you?
Yes, please.
Yes. You stated we should also contact other product groups, like window people, because we are glass people. But in fact, when there was the preliminary working item open, nobody was, there were no experts showing up. So should we do even more efforts to find people?
Okay, number one is yes, please get in touch with us. I'm looking forward to meet you all in the next years and get to know you all. At the time being, please let us know. We are still working on this process because, you know, also this morning we saw that there are now a couple of involved parties, but for the time being, just contact us. And this is just to reflect on, are there any product groups that might impact your c-PCR? So windows and glass could be an example. Just that you reflect on if there are relevant LCA rules that you set up in your c-PCR that might also impact then the one coming next.
Should we come to your WG3 meeting to defend our part?
Only if you have questions. Only if you have questions. If you need more clarity before inquiry, please let us know. The official process is that we comment during inquiry.
But only if we contact you.
But only if you contact us, where we need to.
We should be, so TCP50 should be involved in the inquiry and a formal vote, the version during inquiry and a version to be sent to formal vote, just to be sure that it is in line with the 15804. In fact, due to the CMDT decision, this must take place. And so therefore you need to contact us so that we are, that you send us the documents and that we can also fill in the commenting table, send it to you, and then we have an established dialogue where we can invite you or you can ask to join the working group 3 meeting to clarify certain things and see, have a discussion on it.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. It is not that I want to avoid it, I just didn't want to. I just thought that it will happen automatically. So now I know.
No, and this is the purpose of today's workshop.
Yeah. I will shortly let Nuno answer or add.
Yes, so the process was well explained for inquiry. So when you initiate the work, also inform CNTC 350. At inquiry, it's good to trigger them as well so they can check the documents. But I think one of the most important points for me, and that we learned this a little bit with a mistake, which is don't submit the document to formal votes, because if then CNTC 350 finds out that the document is not aligned with the N1504, then we are after the formal vote, and then we need to ask for exceptional procedures to the BT. So ideally, for formal vote, contact them before submitting the document to formal vote. Yes.
Thank you. At the end, I've heard you. Yeah, you. The mic.
Microphone, please.
Is someone's mic still on? No. Can you try again? Yeah, it's on.
So I'm having some see ITA working with 8. So I have no general comment. I saw on your slide you mentioned the issue of workload coming with future. I saw that you mentioned on your slide deck the issue around the workload of 7 TC350, and I'm also very concerned with that. And I think a lot of people have pointed this out several times to the Commission. And I wanted to ask, has there been any feedback on the Commission on this issue around very short deadlines and the lack of resources? Because often we bring this up, but it disappears. So I was wondering, has there been any engagement from the Commission or any openness to look into this? Because fundamentally, this is going to be an issue in the coming months.
Well, what we are doing as TC350 is we have a very good dialogue both with Nuno and with Oscar on the issue. We are also in the process. It takes some time to prepare some a document, and based on that, we identified that there might be indeed needs for support, and we are investigating what the possibilities are. There might be a possibility, but it's to be checked. And anyway, there's also other some other elements, but I'll come back to that in my presentation, might be assessed by the consultants or from the European Commission. But so indeed, we have also identified that, and we are in a discussion with that.
Maybe, I don't know if I can ask this question, but are you then optimistic that the problem will be
Ich kann da
solved?
was sagen. In terms of the commenting, this is something that is doable. Yeah, so commenting during inquiry is absolutely doable. The problem is we are sometimes in the situation where the product TC wants us several times to read the c-PCR, and this is not doable, you know. Here we really, so during inquiry, this will work, we will organize ourselves, but not that we read on a regular basis the drafts. This is not possible. That's why I mentioned, please involve expert, maybe LCR consultants to support the work.
I'm always positive.
Yes.
You must be.
Yeah, also sitting in Dennis and DC350 workshops. So I'm also aware of this problem, and I'm also responsible for supporting the draft of the c-PCR for thermal insulation and cellular glass. So where it's really, honestly, I think this problem has been raised a few times, and I always have the feeling the Commission is not really taking responsibilities, maybe on how we can support the standardization.
I think as I said, the dialogue is good. They are aware of it, and we are trying to find solutions. And I'm positive that we can find something out. Thank you. Barbara, and then first Barbara, and then.
Thank you. A very short question. While the EPR is to be found, c-PCR, not always, is there any copyright, or do we have the right to go to the institution and say, hey, I found your EPD, it's given the related c-PCR? Thank you.
You mean PCR documents from program operators?
Yes, the part B, not the general part 1, but the B related to the product.
Yeah, but I suggest that you reach out maybe to EPD program operators and simply ask.
Is there any copyright? Can I ask?
I don't think so.
So the documents will be copyrighted. So if you ask, can you explain why this for? But that's for the program. So you are talking about existing PCR documents from program operators.
Yes, about the part B of this the background of the EPD is not the general part 1 or A, but the part B, the one that let you understand how the EPD was issued in which phase.
Normally, yes, there is a part. Some of the program operator divided into a part A and into a part B. My recommendation would be reach out to EPD program operators and simply ask. And there are some databases where you could find them.
Antonio.
Yes, I'm very clear on that for the European Scientific Users Association and European Motor Association. My question relates a bit to what you said about scenarios and transport distances. I was understanding that, especially with regard to the transport in the c-PCR for the CPR, we would be advised to follow the parametric model, so declaration per kilometer, which would be a bit contradicting to what you said, consider transport distances, because then that would be gone. If so, just confirm. And the other question is on older. Is there a limitation to the scenarios? So is there like, if I come along and say, oh, I've got 10 scenarios, is that okay, or is there a kind of limit number of scenarios that maybe that they created will be fine?
Maybe Oscar, you could answer. I think it's the transport distance and the scenarios as well.
Someone's mic is on. Please turn it off. Okay.
So, yes, for the parametric scenarios, this is the default approach. So we can deviate from that if there is a good reason. I don't know. We had the discussion with ready mixed concrete that usually is a range of 25 kilometers, something like that. So, but the default approach should be depending on the distance, just to facilitate the calculation. And about the number of scenarios, the best way is if you already identify what are the most relevant. Of course, there is no limitation, but it doesn't make sense to create very, very narrow scenarios. So we can have, you have to consider that in the end, in the building assessment, they will need to verify what is the applicable scenario, and they can also assess what is the most relevant. So I would recommend to go for the most relevant, considering that this information is not as important in the life cycle assessment as the information, for example, for the production or the transport. So no limitation, but try to apply the logic to avoid really having a huge amount of scenario.
Almost agreed, except that I was actually having advanced transport scenarios. Because if we look at it today, then we're talking about transport by lorry and diesel. It may become transport by lorry and electricity tomorrow. It may be hydrogen. So how many transport scenarios could we possibly consider?
Yeah, so in the current standardization requests, we usually have lorry, we have boat, we have railway. So I would go for the most common that cover, I would say 90 or 95%. And in future revisions of the c-PCR, we can revise and add electric transport if we find that it's relevant or not. So I wouldn't have any limitation. For example, if you usually use two types of lorries to have two separate scenarios, but just be careful not to just have to 100 because this will be not possible.
Another question. First, please, and then.
So question, Julia, as for the c-PCR today, we have the c-PCR published. But in respect of the upcoming standardization list, we are discussing intended uses. So in principle, we have 3 intended uses. Oscar already said you have building, civil engineering, and building equipment in the case of thermal installation. Would it be wise to split the c-PCR in 3 parts in order to accommodate easy scenarios and easy comprehension, especially that as for the harmonized standards, which are also split, as for the end user, the civil engineering in the civil works has nothing to do with the building works and so on and so on.
To me, it sounds plausible, but I think it's. Yeah, to me it sounds plausible, but probably it's also a formal question if standards can be developed in such a way. But
yeah, okay.
Well, from my point of view, the division of the content of the c-PCR is up to the CNTC to decide.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's important to know that, or to acknowledge that, as we heard this morning also, we have, for the time being, we have 1 being published. So we're at the very start and the very beginning of a trajectory. And I think every week, every month, we are learning. The most important thing is that we exchange, that we communicate on it, and that pragmatic solutions are being found. And the second point, which I would like to stress, is because exactly here we are on the, sometimes we are on the edge between what is in the 15804 and what is allowed in 15804, and what is let down or asked by European Commission as standardization requests. Now, what TC 350 or Working Group 3 can do is limit it to 15804. And so some parts, I think it's more beneficial to discuss it with the European Commission when the standardization request is being developed, how you see the structure and how do you think it would be the best. I think that's definitely a possibility. Yeah.
Just a small comment. So take the approach and please inform everybody. You have to be aware that to make sure that everything fits the standardization request, the deliverables. Because I would prefer to have a clear view, because you may face kind of stupid comments because we didn't agree beforehand. But in principle, I don't have any problem. The standards will be assessed, linked to the information which is referred to them. So it doesn't matter really if it is 1, 3 or whatever. If it is better for you, it's okay. But it's good to have really a stable approach.
Yeah. And the same goes for identifying stakeholders and our relevant product disease. The approach is not, it's a recommendation to, because we need to be aware that if you skip it, Well, okay, then the problem will be identified, but at a much later stage. And then you risk of non-citation, of problems with referencing in a harmonized product standard. And so you are just shifting the problem. It's much, we highly recommend to do as much as possible upfront to identify their co-products, which go to another sector, which are dealt with another product TC, and to sit together and to already identify those issues as soon as possible instead of waiting and then at the end identify, oh, there's a problem with consistency or there's we haven't involved them, and then the comments come later, and that might lead to a more problematic situation. Okay. Yes, sir. Good, right.
Is there also already a solution for kits? So if my glass is coming from the factory directly to the building site and my frame is coming from another production location, how do we, as a window manufacturer, declare the total of the product with virtual kits?
I have to look. That's also.
Okay, the responsibility, if you place the product in the market, even if it is delivered in 2 parts, you are responsible of the full window, including the glass. So you can take the information from the frame, from the glass, but you are responsible of the declaration of the window. So that's how the regulation is established. If in a very strange situation, this is not really the case, you will need to do it at building level, but this is not the case. So in practice, you will the economic operator really installing the glass in the window is the economic operator that places it on the market from the point of view of the CPR, and he will be obliged to have the information of the environmental performance.
One last question. Yeah. Cool.
If you have the CPR, it will cover, for example, the case of insulation products, the number of working groups covering different materials. So the c-PCR most likely will contain a number of annexes that are material specific and need to be in there. How will we react to a situation where one or more of the material specific data fails to come? Do we then move on? And what does it mean for, I understand that c-PCR is a need to come forward with the harmonized product standards. How do we treat that situation that is not really unimaginable, that we will see failing contribution of some of the working groups in the protocol to begin? How do we avoid that one failing contribution stops a big part of the c-PCR, but therefore also a big part of the standardization process?
Yeah, I get your question. I don't know if it's will happen, but I see the risk you point out. Yeah, I think there's a big responsibility or task for the TC as a whole to try to push the working groups forward. But what that means from a formal perspective, I think I don't know if Nuno, if you have anything to say additionally.
Well, seems really an issue for SAN 88. Okay, I think it's you have a risk if you include so many materials in one c-PCR. So for the approval of your c-PCR, yes, if you have disagreements on different annexes, this will be a problem because it will delay the whole process because all the harmonized standards rely on that c-PCR. So you need to try to come together with a solution. Another option, maybe you will not like it, which is to have an horizontal c-PCR and then vertical sections, separated documents to complement the c-PCR. So it's just
But probably the same issue will then come back.
but you don't block
Yeah.
for other products. So the c-PCR, yes, that's true. But then if you split in a way, then if you have an issue with one material, you don't block the horizontal standard and you don't block the vertical. Okay, I don't know if I can say standards, but yeah, we wouldn't block it in that way.
Okay.
But just an idea, we don't have to follow the approach.
Okay, thank you for the brainstorm. Any question? Okay, let's move to the next part, which will be probably me. Let's see for the slides. Next one. Yeah, okay. Okay, so as I said, Erik Willem-Pennings is excused himself yesterday to me because one of his family is hospitalized. So I will do my best to take over. His presentation might be a bit shorter, but at least I can hand over the key elements of it. Okay. Because we used to have the Sense Sector Forum on Construction, where the different TCs dealing with construction meet regularly to discuss and to keep each other informed. This has been very recently renamed into, and I must read it myself, a coordination group on construction and the built environment, with slightly different terms of reference, but that is less importance. But what is important is that we have been identifying in that group that there is a need to collect issues, questions, gaps identified dealing with the construction, the CPR, and standardization. That has been the main issue. And so just for information, so the COG coordination group is chaired by Steve Denton, who is also chairing TC250 from Eurocodes, secretariat by BSI. So here you see an overview of who is being represented in that group. And so we have, coming back to one aspect in that group, is the ad hoc group landscape mapping, where we some people have been sitting together now for 2 meetings, and there's a third one planned, I think, next week, this week or next week. And yeah, the task is, and I will read it out, mapping of potential challenges for product TCs, limited to matters of concern to standardization, arising from the upcoming new CPR, and identifying ownership of the topics and related initiatives. So it goes a little bit beyond purely c-PCRs and beyond the environmental aspects. It's much wider, but of course, the environmental aspects play an important role in it. And so the idea is to have at least some kind of a document where we identify them, where they are, where it can be followed up, and where we can identify who will take it on. To avoid that, because we had a lot of questions of, is European Commission aware of this? Is SEN aware of this? Is CEN-TC350 aware of this? And we don't hear about it. At least there will be one overview document where the things are identified and mapped. So it's already a long document, and Erik has taken up the task to lead that at an interim basis. He doesn't want to see himself as the convener or the responsible for this, but he is doing the work on a voluntary basis. It's quite intensive. So that's well appreciated. And so there are several environmental and sustainability aspects. This is how it looks like. Some examples he has put in. It touches some aspects which we have been discussing this morning or this afternoon in relation with ESPR, the intended use over 50 years. So we're right now in the process of trying to well define the issue and trying to have a first idea of who could be the right person to deal with it. And is it a high priority or a low priority? And that will then be discussed in the next plenary meeting also. Why do we have this? Why did I want to have this presentation today? Is that the product TCs are aware of this exercise, and so also that if you have any horizontal or so not related to a very specific technical issue, but if there's any horizontal aspect of it, you think, okay, this is something which we identify as a gap or something which is missing, or there's no guidance for this or for that. By example, there's one line, I don't know if it's here, on factory production control, there needs to be developed something. We don't know if it's been taken on board. So there's a place to map it. Let me quickly, it's also makes fast. Yeah, so so if you have anything, please put it forward to your the representative of the product TC who is attending or who is member of the of that group for information. Okay. There are some slides missing, but that's I don't know if my slides are in.
Your answer was first.
My
let's go back
first. Okay, so that's one.
No, we started here.
The previous one. It was yours.
Or some line like some drawings in it, but okay.
After you have the conclusion.
I think. Give me just 1 second.
Maybe in the first version you sent us.
You
And I
have
can-
put the first and not the second version.
No, the second I did.
No, it was in the second. I have it.
That's weird.
Yes.
This is the
I can
first.
do it orally. I think that's fine without slides.
No, it was in the second one. And you have it.
Then okay, I will do it just orally. That's fine. I will now and then look at my slides on my computer.
This is the second one.
Okay, so the second part of this part on gaps is that as I've been saying, there is that's okay, it's okay. Is that there's also a lot of procedures, and also for TC350 it's new, and there's a European Commission, there is SENS and TC350, the product TCs, there's a whole lot of and with the goal to develop DOPCs which have sufficiently robust information to be used at building level and at all a whole range of other applications. And the task of TC350 was identified as, okay, please, you have the experts on board to check compliance with EN 15804. From that, of course, raises several other questions, and the basic question is this sufficient? And that was the origin of the discussion which we are having with the Management Center and with the European Commission. Is that because we can check TC350 can check the compliance with EN 15804 every one-on-one. There was a very nice diagram in my slides, but you can imagine it. And so, but if there's a one-on-one compliance check, that doesn't automatically mean that all different c-PCRs are consistent between them and can be used at building level, or they might lead to several elements. One of the just to highlight some elements, there could be different levels of detail in the c-PCR. Some product TC can really dig into it, another one can deal with the chapter more superficially. We can sometimes additional rules. There might be co-products allocations and you haven't identified them. There might be other ways of defining default values, because there's also often a request. Different way of describing scenarios. So the task force TC350 is to try to learning by doing, but also to improve that and to find a system where this can be done, but also where we can see who is checking what. And one of the important messages which I want to give today is that TC350 is responsible for checking compliance with EN 15804. But the c-PCR which you are developing does not only need to be compliant to, can you just?
I have found it. So I put them.
It's a bit confusing.
Yes, I put
I
them.
see the eyes in the audience. On the screen and back.
Yes, I have
It's very
seen.
funny.
Where is share? I don't find the sharing. No?
But I'm always there. It's just
green thing. Oh yes. Yes, I have found the ones you are looking for.
yeah, but no, just let it go. Just let it go.
Support is important. That's okay. Yeah.
Okay, so c-PCR compliant to 15804, but as was mentioned in this morning, but on different occasions, you must be compliant to the standardization request. There might be other elements in it, and that's really crucial. So there's also responsibility if you, because if you look at European and international standards, the c-PCR or PCR needs to be reviewed, verified, but that's in reality for our process, that's a split responsibility. It is done by not just one group who verifies the PCR, but it's partly done by TC350 regarding to 15804. It will be partly done by SEN, by the SHREC to or by the HES consultants also to see the relation with standardization request. There will also be a big responsibility for the European Commission to check, by example, the plausibility of the scenarios. And also for that, so this is becoming clear, and we are preparing a guidance to explain all these different elements. It will contain who is doing what. So for every product to see, it will become clear what do you need to expect from whom. We will try to involve some general guidance on the different clauses of the 15804, like model clauses or model texts. Of course, we know that ideally, when the CPR is published, all of this is ready. But I hope that you can understand that it's not possible. It depends on the experience of every product you see. So this is an exercise which will evolve in time, but there will be something upcoming, maybe within 4, 5, 6 months. It's a bit to be seen if it's guidance or if it's a guide. But that's what we're working on. And definitely to stress the importance of the standardization request, to not wait for it, but to be aware of it, that it might need for an amendment, to identify the relevant products stakeholders. We have heard it. Some product TCs are aware of it because they are doing it right now, but you might have a product which is used as an input for another product from another product TC. So all this needs to fit together at a certain point. Yeah, so that was it, a little bit improvisation, apologies for that. But just to highlight that it's a process, and I think you're on the right track. We have a very good communication as TC350 with both Nuno and with Oscar. So fully confident on that. And also with the product TCs within working group 3, goes very good process. So so happy with that. On that, before jumping to conclusions, questions on this topic. Yeah, without. Yeah. Right side. Doesn't work. If you speak up.
Yes.
Otherwise, you say it and I repeat the question. It's fine also.
Yeah. My question was regarding especially the scenarios, and to see whether that would be agreed and validated in the first c-PCR would apply to other, because that might be not controversial between different c-PCR, but if typically on the scenario one is deciding to go for that type of scenario, it has to be machine readable at some point. I would expect that every c-PCR should have the same type of scenario. Otherwise, we end up with a configuration of different type of scenarios that are not matching with each other. Then ultimately, you can evaluate it.
Yeah, okay, thank you for the question. Your mic dropped, so but that's okay. I can quickly repeat it. The issue which has been raised is that the first ones may define a certain way of developing scenarios, which then, of course, for the product groups which come next, ideally for have a proper user friendliness, but also have a correct view. The similar scenarios should be developed in a similar way. That's a good point. And I have an answer in two elements. The first one is that within TC350, the idea is to have, we don't have it yet, but the idea is to have some kind of a mapping again of all c-PCRs, just to see per chapter how it is done, to see how it changes or can change, and then to come forward with a common approach. And that's the first part. And the second part is that I also think that for the European Commission, there's a task to overview the process and to correct the direction in a slight direction, by example, by including certain elements in a standardization request or in the upcoming standardization requests. I don't know if you want to shortly add to that.
Yeah, so we are at the very beginning of this process. So of course, at the beginning, we may have some discrepancies, but also different approaches may also make sense. So for the moment, we are just presenting in the standardization request a name for it. But in future, we see that we need to be a bit stricter and define more clearly the scenarios, for example, for transport, which are common scenarios. We will do it. And also, I think that potentially TC350 can also have some recommendations about it. So I think there are different ways to address this topic. The main issue is if you identify this kind of problem, you tell us that's happening and we will see what is the best way to address it.
Yeah. Just a
Short
small
question.
follow-up.
And then if you realize that something would need to be standardized, is it likely that the first c-PCR would be asked to go for if it's compatible with the ones that have been developed later on once the requirement was stricter?
Okay. This is, I just give you my personal view, and maybe you also can correct. I think it depends. It depends on what the issue is. If it's fundamental to be used for use, and I'm just thinking out loud, if it's fundamental for use in the life cycle calculations for the EPBD, then I can imagine that there will be a request for an amendment because it endangers the implementation of a European directive. If it's just a matter of it's not ideal, it would be better than the streamlined, but it's not hampering any progress, then I think it might be more efficient use of resources to wait for the revision or systematic review of the standards or for a new standardization request when it's due, instead of like a hamster continuously giving ourselves work. Jump first, you, yeah.
Since all our c-PCRs will be confronted with 15804, my question is, and I take opportunity of having the specialist here, how do you see the evolution of 15804? Is there to be expected changes in the near future, or do you consider it as something very stable for the next few years?
You answer, do I answer? Okay, very good question, because it's a question which has not been asked before, and I know that everyone in the room has it. So it's a good question. No, I just give my 5 cents, and then I think it can be complemented. The other experts asking. No, for the time being, we have the 15804. We had a systematic review. It has been confirmed, and the version of this has been confirmed. So we're working with that. From TC350 perspective, what we are doing is we will start preparing on what are the elements where it can be improved for a future revision. But a future revision will only start when we get a standardization request from the European Commission. And that depends on several other developments in the European Commission, which may take some time. That's why we confirmed it and to create stability and to be at least sure, okay, if you work now in a product TC, it's a current 15804 full stop. And it will be sufficiently stable for the coming years. Okay, perfect, apparently. Yeah, you.
Different question, but on the sector group.
Your mic,
I have a question about what's on the screen right now. Could you repeat again the composition of that group and who's in it? Because you asked for a contribution, but like horizontal topics around.
If I'm not mistaken, every construction project, every construction related product TC should have a representative in the COG.
No.
No? Damn. I said I'm not the expert. I'm just taking it over, but Nuno will clarify.
Yeah, so the coordination group on construction basically has our NSBs, so representatives of our NSBs, representatives of horizontal TCs, and partners organizations. So this is maybe an invitation for ERIMA to become a partner.
Okay. I think that is it. I have prepared some conclusions because we're almost at the end. We have 30 minutes left. I don't know if these are on slides. Yeah, okay, some conclusions. Okay, thank you. Okay, some of which I just mentioned. This is one on the responsibilities. So it is clear, in my own words, the product TC is responsible for drafting the c-PCR. CENTI 350 can play an important role. We are here. If you have any questions on, there's a sentence in the 15804 which you don't understand, collect your questions, reach out to us, and we can help you with that. What we cannot do is to offer life cycle assessments, expertise, how to do it, how to develop your scenarios, hands-on assistance. That's we don't have the capacity, but also we don't have the expertise because the expertise lies with most of the related to scenarios. The expertise lies within the product TC. It's you who know all over Europe what is the technology being used, what are the scenarios current practice. You can also not, I didn't mention it, but what we also cannot do is to systematically check for conflicting standards. If we identify it, and it has happened that we identify, oh, here's something written which is in conflict with another EN standard, we will definitely raise a flag to send to the product TC, of course, also when there's conflicting standard, because that is not allowed within SEN. But also be careful for that. Don't think we will act on our own. If another standard is already existing, you might run into trouble at a later stage. We look for a time being to the European Commission. It needs to be decided to the European Commission. Their experts has consulted how to be organized. There are some views, but it needs to be crystallized. It's, of course, the compliance of the c-PCR with the standardization requests. The consistency between c-PCRs to be used at building level. Representative plausibility of the scenarios, default data if they are given, but of course, TC350 will also have a look at it, and if you identify things, we will flag it, and vice versa. There are some specific clauses, of specific elements which I think are necessary to communicate. Okay, it's a CNBT decision, but let's repeat it. Involve TC350. Inform us that you are having a work item, that you will start working on it. Contact Julia or the Secretariat Milan to get the template, the working documents, so we can work in a structured way without going into all directions. Focus on the current EN 15804. Have a look if you start to work on your c-PCR. If the standardization request often will not be ready on the table. Have a look at the milestones documents of the horizontal subgroup or CPR group, that you are aware of how is the parameterized approach defined. What is the view of European Commission reference service like? What can I expect? Those documents are public. Please have a look at them. I think that's really necessary. The milestone documents of the European Commission also contain some clauses of the EN 1584 which you don't need to dig into, which you don't need to take into account, because it's not applicable in the CPR context, in the DOPC context. It's not an EPD that you are developing, it's a DOPC. At least for the framework today in the harmonized zone. And then, as Julia already mentioned also, that's also by its conclusion, there are some recommendations already right now, which we see in TC350 and Working Group 3, which are not by means mandatory for you to do, but what we think can be a very good starting point for product TCs, and that is by having or issuing a preparatory life cycle assessment study. Not because you need to know the hotspots for a DOPC, but if you know what the hotspots are, what the technologies are, then at least you can focus your attention and your resources on where it is most useful, instead of tackling the same amount of work on the whole life cycle. Check the composition of your product TC. Mind, sound, logic, but from some communication you have the impression, okay, you need some more in-house expertise on what life cycle assessment is, how scenarios need to be developed, and what they mean. So do a supporting study, so life cycle assessment, but also have a look at existing PCR documents from program operators. Yes, of course, there is copyright on them. Everything someone makes is copyrighted, but it should hold you back to reach out to them and to see if you can use that knowledge through your members. And identify and apply all other product TCs touching your environmental impact. And I know that's quite just a sentence, but it's quite a game changer, because most of the time product TCs are used to dealing with characteristics which are independent of the life cycle, and which are independent of how it is manufactured, or independent on the flow of materials. If you have a compression strength, you know, I need to declare it. I take a cube according to certain rules, I test it, and I have my compression strength. It's independent on where it is manufactured. But if you look at the environmental impact, there's a lot of other actors which might intervene. So have a look at the life cycle, try to map it, and try to reach out to them and gain expertise to avoid problems in a later stage. Last slide. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, this is just overall. We do get a lot of questions within TC350, which is good, which means that you are interested, which is logic, because there's a CPR, legal context, interests. So, okay. And we want to move as quickly as possible, and try to move as quickly as possible, but also for us, resources are limited, and knowledge is coming in every week, every day. With every question asked, there's a new light that shines on the issue. So please be patient. We will do our best to provide answers together with the network we have. We are preparing guides or guidance to help you. All the questions which you received today and in the chats, we will use to improve that guidance to clarify a lot of questions. Yeah, as a last point, it might be that your c-PCR will not be perfect when you have made it at the first stage. Still, let's move on, be positive, and there might be options to amend it, to review it in due time, and when everything becomes more clear. That was the point final of today. Rests me to thank all of you also for the big interaction, the good questions, the attendance, especially for the speakers also, Julia, Unless you had to leave, but also, of course, Oscar and Nino. If there's any question left, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We may not be able to answer straight away, but at least we can identify it, and we'll try to do our best to move forward in a good direction. Good luck and prepare.